Hi guys. Tonight we drift into a world where the cold bites first, and explanations come later, where your breath fogs before your thoughts can form, and where you quickly realize you probably will not survive this if you try it for real. You stand at the edge of the Rocky Mountains in the fading light, snow already whispering against your boots, your fingers stiffening even though the wind has only begun to rise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling yourself, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, and you let the world around you soften as you step forward into the dusk. You trudge up the slope, each step a small crunch of ice that echoes quietly between the scattered pines. The air tastes sharp, almost metallic, and you can feel the familiar pinch along the inside of your nose that comes only in deep winter. You tug your coat tighter, not because it helps much, but because the gesture feels reassuring in a place that seems determined to undo you. Behind you, the trail is already vanishing into a blur of wind-blown powder, as if the mountain wants to erase your presence the moment you arrive. You pause, listening. The wind murmurs through the branches with a voice so soft it seems half asleep. In this moment, you imagine yourself as one of those early trappers, those men who wandered these slopes for months at a time, trading comfort for pelts and solitude. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your mind. By the early 1800s, the fur trade in the Rockies had grown so valuable that hundreds of men roamed these terrains each season, living in small groups or entirely alone. Yet as widespread as their presence was, the nights remained their greatest trial. You step deeper into the trees, letting your eyes adjust to the dimming light. The world shrinks into shades of blue and charcoal. The cold, at first quaint and scenic, now begins to feel personal. You rub your hands together and feel that faint sting that means your skin is losing the fight. It makes you wonder what on earth those mountain men actually slept on, and how they kept from freezing in temperatures that dipped well below zero. Historians still argue whether mountain men exaggerated their hardship stories around campfires, or whether the truth was even harsher than the records suggest. You move between two heavy pines whose branches fan out low and wide, like arms trying to shelter you. The needles smell sweet and resinous, and you catch a hint of smoke in the air, though there is no fire nearby. Maybe just a phantom scent carried on memory. The ground here is uneven, but at least the wind is reduced to a thin whistle instead of a full slap across your face. You pause and kneel, brushing aside the top layer of snow. The earth is icy and compacted beneath, far colder than the air. You realize quickly that lying on this ground for more than a few minutes would sap every bit of heat from your body. Early trappers learned this the hard way, and some never learned it at all. You recall a quirky tidbit you once encountered. A few old journals claim that some overconfident newcomers slept directly on the snow their first nights, believing their thick coats would be enough, only to wake chilled to the bone, shivering uncontrollably, sometimes unable to speak. You stand again, shifting your pack, and continue upward. Your breath puffs in soft clouds, and the sound of your boots crunching in the icy crust becomes a steady rhythm, a kind of heartbeat for the empty wilderness. The Rockies rise ahead of you in vast undulating walls. In the fading light, the peaks look both majestic and deeply unforgiving. You can almost imagine those trappers trudging ahead of you, shaping the path with their own heavy footfalls. The temperature drops suddenly, that kind of quick plunge that feels like the mountain exhaling right into your bones. You tighten your jaw and step faster, wanting to warm yourself through motion. It barely helps. You rub your arms, trying to coax blood to the surface. The cold up here does not negotiate. It simply exists and expects you to keep up. As twilight deepens, you press on through a dense stand of spruce. The darkness among the trees is thick enough that you reach out occasionally to steady yourself on a trunk. The bark feels rough, ridged with frozen sap. You run your fingers along it, and imagine how trappers sometimes leaned against these same trees, letting their legs rest, letting the cold remind them they were still alive. You stand again, shifting your pack, and continue upward. Your breath puffs in soft clouds, and the sound of your boots crunching in the icy crust becomes a steady rhythm, a kind of heartbeat for the empty wilderness. The Rockies rise ahead of you in vast undulating walls. In the fading light, the peaks look both majestic and deeply unforgiving. You can almost imagine those trappers trudging ahead of you, shaping the path with their own heavy footfalls. Some nights the only sleep they found was a brief doze while sitting upright, because lying down meant too much exposure. You keep walking until the trees thin slightly and the horizon shows the last glimmer of day. You move toward that faint glow, even though it offers no warmth. The snow beneath your boots grows deeper, softer, as if you are stepping into down feathers. It slows you, but not enough to bother you. In a strange way, the snow becomes comforting, muffling the world, making every movement feel gentle. You crest a small rise, and the land opens into a quiet clearing. The sky above is turning the color of cooling embers, streaked with the last orange traces of sunlight. You breathe in slowly. The air enters your lungs like cold water. You exhale, watching your breath drift upward and vanish. Here, in this clearing, you imagine a trapper setting camp. A lonely bed of branches, a tiny fire, a buffalo robe thrown loosely over his shoulders. Just enough warmth to cling to until dawn. You feel the weight of that image as you stand, the cold working steadily into your gloves, into your boots, into the spaces behind your knees where warmth hides but cannot stay for long. You shift your pack again, edging closer to the center of the clearing. The snow here is less disturbed, smoother. You crouch down and scoop a handful of it, feeling how light and dry it is. This kind of powdery snow is easy to brush away, easy to clear for a bedding spot. You let it fall through your fingers like dust. Far above, a bird cries out, its voice sharp and brief. It startles you slightly, the sound slicing through the stillness. You watch as a dark shape wings across the dim sky, disappearing into shadow. That lonely call makes you think of the trappers who spent entire winters in these mountains, seeing only birds and tracks and the occasional distant smoke plume. Survival depended on tiny details. Where to step, where to sleep, where to hide from the cold that could end a life in a single poorly prepared night. You rise, brushing snow from your gloves, and draw a long breath. Already your legs feel heavy from the cold. You imagine the mountain men pushing through this same exhaustion night after night, driven by trade, necessity, and something deeper and harder to define. Maybe adventure, maybe stubbornness, maybe hunger. The clearing grows darker. The cold presses closer. You take one more step into the gathering night, ready to learn how to sleep in a place that wants to keep you awake forever. You move through the clearing and angle toward the darker tree line ahead, letting the cold guide your instincts the way it once guided the mountain men. The wind has shifted. It is subtle at first, almost like a curious hand brushing the back of your neck, but you feel it sharpening as it sweeps down from the higher ridges. You realize quickly that tonight, just like for the trappers who came before you, one of the first tasks is finding a windbreak. Without one, no amount of fur or fire will give you real rest. You pull your coat tighter and scan the terrain with the new awareness settling into your bones. You walk slowly, each step sinking with a soft hiss into the snow. The forest ahead looks like a wall of dark shapes, yet as you draw closer, you begin to see the outlines more clearly. Fallen logs, clustered spruce, boulders half buried under drifts. You tilt your head, listening again. The wind funnels through the clearing behind you in a long, low whistle, but here beneath the trees, that whistle breaks into fragments. You can almost hear the land showing you where to sleep and where not to. Early mountain men learned quickly that choosing a bad sleeping spot could turn an ordinary night into a disaster. A mainstream historical fact resurfaces as you study the trees. Trappers often set camp on the leeward side of ridges, because wind could strip heat from a sleeping body faster than snow or even rain. Cold air moving across the skin drains warmth far more efficiently than still air, and in the Rockies, the gusts can be relentless. You feel a little of that now, as a sudden draft curls around your ankles, sneaking under the hem of your coat like a mischievous animal. You angle farther between two thick pines. Their branches dip low and heavy, crowding the ground. The needles smell sharp and pleasant, a small reminder that this mountain has its comforts in between the trials. You push aside a branch and step into a hollow space sheltered beneath the drooping canopy. Here, the snow is thinner. The air feels noticeably calmer. You let out a slow breath and watch it drift upward without scattering. This space reminds you of something one trapper wrote in a winter journal long ago, a quirky tidbit that always stuck with you. He claimed he chose sleeping spots by squatting down and pretending he was a rabbit, imagining where a creature that hates drafts would settle. He preferred low places surrounded by tight branches. Historians still argue whether this so-called rabbit test was meant seriously or was simply a bit of frontier humor, but the idea certainly fits the mindset of men who survived by paying attention to animals and copying their habits. You crouch as the trappers once did, lowering yourself until your boots crunch the packed snow under one of the pines. You run your gloved hand along the ground and feel how the air barely moves here. The needles overhead form a loose but effective roof. Snow clings to them in pale clumps that dim the world, almost like a natural lantern shade. Everything feels quieter under this canopy, as if sound itself slows down. You straighten and walk a short loop around the tree, checking for hazards. One broken branch juts downward at a threatening angle. You push it aside and snap it off cleanly. It cracks loudly, the sound echoing briefly up the trunk. You toss it away and hear it thump softly into a drift. Small tasks like this, you realize, are the ones that consumed the mountain men each night. Not dramatic battles or furious hunts. Just tiny, necessary tweaks that determined whether they slept soundly or wrestled the cold until sunrise. You step out of the pine hollow and continue searching for an even better windbreak. The forest thickens, then thins around small clearings. You spot a fallen log angled diagonally across a shallow depression. Its root system still lifts from the ground like the ribs of some buried creature. As you approach, you sense the way the log disrupts the airflow. A tender hush exists behind it. Snow rests lightly in this sheltered pocket, undisturbed by the wind that still passes overhead. You step into the hollow and feel the wind fade instantly. You close your eyes for a moment and savor the relief. In a place like this, a trapper might roll out his bedroll or pile boughs without worrying about gusts stealing his warmth. You kneel and brush snow from the log's surface, exposing dark, frozen bark. A faint smell of old wood rises, earthy and cold. You picture a man decades ago doing this same motion, perhaps after a day of trapping beaver in icy creeks, hands stiff, shoulders aching, longing for the simplest comfort, still air. You stand and trace the curve of the fallen tree with your eyes. The log has settled firmly into the ground, leaving little risk of rolling. The depression behind it would cradle a bed nicely. You test the space by stepping behind the trunk and lowering yourself until you sit with your back against the curved wood. You feel how the log blocks the wind entirely. Only the faintest breeze skims the top and curls gently downward, barely noticeable. As you sit, you think about the mountain men and their relationship with the landscape. Many had almost supernatural skill when it came to reading terrain. They recognized windbreaks instinctively, spotting protective hollows the way most people spot street signs. You recall another old observation from a trapper's written account. He noted that wolves and elk often bedded down on slopes that seemed counterintuitive to newcomers. You picture a man decades ago doing this same motion, perhaps after a day of trapping beaver in icy creeks, hands stiff, shoulders aching, longing for the simplest comfort, still air. You stand and trace the curve of the fallen tree with your eyes. The log has settled firmly into the ground, leaving little risk of rolling. The depression behind it would cradle a bed nicely. You test the space by stepping behind the trunk and lowering yourself until you sit with your back against the curved wood. You feel how the log blocks the wind entirely. Only the faintest breeze skims the top and curls gently downward, barely noticeable. As you sit, you think about the mountain men and their relationship with the landscape. Many had almost supernatural skill when it came to reading terrain. They recognized windbreaks instinctively, spotting protective hollows the way most people spot street signs. You recall another old observation from a trapper's written account. He noted that wolves and elk often bedded down on slopes that seemed counterintuitive to newcomers. You stand and trace the curve of the fallen tree with your eyes. The log has settled firmly into the ground, leaving little risk of rolling. The depression behind it would cradle a bed nicely. You test the space by stepping behind the trunk and lowering yourself until you sit with your back against the curved wood. You feel how the log blocks the wind entirely. Only the faintest breeze skims the top and curls gently downward, barely noticeable. Yet those spots, when examined closely, were shielded by subtle angles of rock or tree clusters. Mountain men watched these animals and copied them. They often trusted wildlife more than their own judgment. The air grows darker. The snow continues to fall. You exhale, letting the last bit of daylight fade behind your eyelids as you deepen into the shelter, ready to learn the next necessity of survival in these unforgiving mountains. You sit in the pocket of stillness behind the fallen log a little longer, letting your eyes adjust to the deepening twilight. But soon, a new realization settles over you, heavier than the cold. A windbreak might protect you from the worst of the gusts, but without fire, this hidden nook will become a freezer by midnight. You straighten slowly, joints stiff, and brush snow from your coat. The trappers learned this lesson long before you did. Without a dependable fire, even the toughest mountain man had only a fragile grip on survival. You step out from behind the log and feel the wind skim lightly across your cheeks. It has picked up, steady and confident, as if reminding you that comfort here is temporary and entirely conditional. You take a moment to choose a small clearing just a few paces away, close enough to the windbreak to benefit from its protection, but open enough that your fire can breathe without choking on drifting snow. You kneel and sweep aside a circle of powder. The snow is dry and squeaks faintly when you brush it away. Beneath it lies hard ground, cold and stubborn. You glance around for fuel, and already the pressure of the task settles in your shoulders. Fire is warmth, protection, light, a small companion in the dark. But it is also work. It always has been. Even the earliest journals of mountain men mention how much of their evenings were spent gathering branches before the cold deepened. A mainstream historical fact from the fur trade era comes to mind. You lean back again, settling into the quiet hollow, letting your mind drift to the men who came before you. Some nights they slept well, warmed by fires and hides. Other nights they shivered through every minute, grateful simply to stay alive. The windbreak was their first defense, a silent guardian that turned the harsh world into something a little more forgivable. You move from tree to tree, tapping low branches with your glove. Some twigs snap crisply, perfect for kindling. Others bend limply, heavy with moisture. You toss aside the damp ones and pocket the dry ones, letting them ride in the crook of your elbow. You gather a small armful of sticks, then look for something thicker. A deadfall lies halfway buried near the edge of the clearing, its branches thin and bleached. You grasp one and pull. It cracks free with a muted pop, releasing a tiny burst of dust from its rotten interior. The smell that rises is musty and oddly sweet. You carry your loot back to the small cleared circle and crouch again. The wind teases the edges of your pile, lifting light twigs and setting them back down with a kind of delicate impatience. You press your palm against the cold earth, grounding yourself, reminding yourself to work calmly. Mountain men often built their fires low and small, partly to conserve fuel and partly to avoid attracting attention. A quirky tidbit you once read slips back into your thoughts. Some trappers believed a large fire at night invited not just human trouble, but also unwanted wildlife, especially curious mountain lions drawn by warmth and flickering light. Whether this was genuine frontier wisdom or simply superstition, historians still debate, but the idea certainly makes you think twice before building anything too bright. You arrange your smallest twigs in a loose nest, careful not to pack them tightly. Air needs to weave through them. You place a few strips of bark at the center, peeling them from a fallen limb where they hung dry. You tuck them gently into the heart of the kindling. The world around you has gone quiet except for the wind moving through the upper branches. Snow falls in fragile flakes, each one catching a glint of fading light before settling on your gloves. You brush them off, then reach for your tinder. You pat your pockets, feeling for something soft, fibrous, ready to catch a spark. Mountain men sometimes use dried grass, shredded bark, or even bits of old rope. You choose the material you have set aside and tease it lightly with your fingers until it fluffs into a small mound. You crouch even lower, shielding the kindling with your body as best you can. A spark leaps, then dies. Another flicker. Then a thin curl of smoke rises, wavering softly in the cold air. You lean close, blowing gently, breath warm and steady. The tinder glows faintly like a tiny sleeping eye. You blow again, careful but insistent. The glow brightens, a small coal pushing outward until at last a flame blooms, fragile but determined. It licks the bark scrap, then reaches for the twigs above. You feel an unexpected ripple of relief in your chest. The fire gives off almost no heat yet, but heat is coming. You feed a few more thin twigs to the early flames, watching them catch, their edges curling into delicate orange ribbons. A soft crackle begins, subtle but promising. You add one thicker stick and place it at an angle so the flames climb upward. The smell of burning pine needles drifts through the air. It mixes with the crisp scent of snow and something faintly metallic, a reminder of how cold the world around you remains despite this tiny burst of warmth. You sit back on your heels and let your hands hover over the rising heat, savoring the first touches of comfort. Your fingers tingle as sensation returns. You glance up at the surrounding trees, their branches shaking their powdered coats in slow motions. The fire casts a dim circle of amber on the snow, a small oasis carved out of the darkness. You imagine yourself as one of the trappers after a long day of trekking through icy ravines. Back then, fire was as close as they came to a friend or confidant. Many wrote in their journals by firelight, their hands trembling from cold, their ink freezing if the flame died too soon. You adjust one of the thicker branches and notice the fire responding with a quiet, satisfying hiss. You lean back, letting your shoulders relax. Yet you cannot relax completely. You remember how the mountain men had to guard their fires through the night. Not constantly, but often enough to prevent embers from dying or from spreading. Sparks could leap into pine duff, and a careless moment could send flames creeping toward a bedroll. Some men even claimed that dry winter winds could snuff out a fire without warning, though that claim remains a point of debate among scholars. You watch the fire, letting it grow at a slow, steady pace. It is a modest flame, nothing dramatic, just enough to warm your hands and provide the comfort of light. Shadows shift around you, pooling at the edges of the clearing. The windbreak you chose earlier forms a gentle curve behind you, blocking the worst gusts and allowing the fire to perform its quiet magic. As the flames grow stronger, you feel a subtle comfort spreading through your chest. The cold still sits in your feet and wrists, but the core of your body begins to loosen. You stretch your fingers again, pushing them closer to the warmth, savoring the relief. You lift a handful of snow and let it melt just slightly near the fire before rubbing it against your lips. The icy water wakes you, a small jolt of clarity. You sit for a while, listening to the fire crackle, feeling its heat radiate toward you in faint but steady pulses. You imagine a trapper from 2 centuries ago doing the same thing, boots steaming lightly, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, letting the fire lull him into the first hints of drowsiness. He might have been alone or perhaps sitting across from a companion, both wrapped in heavy robes, sharing a silence that was neither awkward nor heavy, just practical, just necessary. The sky above darkens fully now, stars peeking through in scattered glints. The forest deepens into long vertical shadows. The snow glows faintly in your firelight, its surface mottled with shifting reflections. A distant owl calls once, its low note drifting through the trees like a gentle reminder that night has fully arrived. You add another branch to the fire, watching the flames embrace it slowly. The warmth expands just a bit more, soft enough to lull the edges of your awareness. You take a deep breath, letting the cold air fill your lungs, then release it softly, letting your shoulders sink. The fire has taken hold. The night is settling. You feel the rhythm of survival humming quietly around you. The wind may howl above, but down here, in your small circle of light, you begin to understand how mountain men push through the cold one night at a time. You rise from the fire's glow, with the awareness that your next task is just as important as warmth itself. You need something to sleep on, something that keeps your body lifted away from the freezing ground. The moment you take a step outside the firelight, the cold presses against your boots again, almost as if it wants to remind you who is in charge here. The mountain men understood that the earth below them was far more dangerous at night than the air above. It steals heat quietly and relentlessly, pulling warmth down and away, until even the sturdiest traveler wakes trembling. You move toward a small cluster of pines whose branches curve outward like open hands. Their needles form thick layers on the ground, but you know loose needles alone are not enough to keep you warm. You need fresh boughs, ones still full of resin and spring, ones that trap pockets of air and create insulation the way a mattress traps comfort. You kneel beneath the lowest branch and run your fingers over the glossy needles. They feel cool but full of life, with a faintly sticky touch that clings to your gloves. As you examine the tree, a well-known historical detail floats into your mind. Many trappers in the Rocky Mountains slept on beds of fir or spruce because these evergreens stayed flexible even in brutal cold, providing natural cushioning that kept their bodies from sinking into icy soil. The simple trick of layering branches had saved countless wanderers from frostbite long before sleeping pads existed. You pluck a few boughs carefully, avoiding damage to the inner growth, then stack them in the crook of your arm. A few steps away, a second tree droops low, its branches heavy with snow. You brush the snow aside and tug gently at a bough. It resists for a moment before cracking free with a clean snap. As you gather the limbs, you remember an odd little anecdote from a trapper's diary you once read. He claimed that the softest beds came from trees struck by lightning, insisting the wood felt warmer, as if it held onto a spark of that wild energy. Whether he meant it literally or simply enjoyed telling tall tales, no one can say with certainty. Some modern researchers still puzzle over the authenticity of that claim, noting that charred wood does sometimes retain heat differently, but not enough to create a genuine advantage. Even so, the image lingers in your imagination, adding a touch of mystery to these quiet trees around you. You continue collecting boughs until you have a respectable armful. The snow crunches under your boots as you return to your fire, each step leaving broad tracks like a slow-moving animal. You drop the branches beside your windbreak and dust off your gloves. Your breath spills into the cold air in soft, hazy clouds. The fire crackles gently, its light flickering golden across the snow. You kneel beside your chosen sheltering spot and begin arranging the boughs with deliberate care. You start by laying the thicker branches in a loose, crisscross pattern. The needles brush against your coat with a faint whispering sound. You weave thinner pieces between them, building a springy layer that rises a few inches off the ground. As you work, the smell of crushed pine fills the air, sharp and comforting. The scent mixes with the smoke from your fire, creating a fragrance that feels both wild and deeply calming. You test the bedding with your hand. It compresses slightly, then springs back. The branches create tiny pockets of air beneath your palm, insulating your skin from the cold earth. Mountain men relied heavily on this natural insulation. Without it, a person could lose heat several times faster, even if wrapped in the thickest fur. One early explorer wrote that the ground in midwinter felt alive with cold, almost like a living creature trying to pull warmth downward. Modern experts still discuss how accurate his description was, debating whether he exaggerated or simply struggled to express the intensity of ground frost. But regardless of the words he used, the effect was real and deadly. You continue adjusting the bows, tugging at one edge, smoothing another. The wind taps at your back, but it no longer feels menacing. You have created a small sanctuary inside this vast wilderness. When you step onto the bed to test it, your weight sinks gently into the branches with a soft crunch. It feels uneven, but far warmer than bare earth. You sit for a moment, letting your legs rest, feeling the subtle warmth that radiates upward as the boughs trap your body heat. A breeze rustles overhead, shaking snow loose from the pines. The flakes drift down like slow-motion stars, melting immediately when they touch the fire's breath. You reach out and adjust a few branches, tightening the weave, making the bed slightly higher at the head where your shoulders will rest. The structure is simple, but incredibly effective. The trappers were masters at using whatever nature offered. They built beds in minutes, not hours, relying on intuition shaped by countless nights in the wild. As you sit on your improvised mattress, you think of another curious notion you once encountered in a book on frontier survival. It claimed that some mountain men believed sleeping directly above certain types of roots kept dreams calm and prevented restless tossing. There was no scientific basis given, and the idea remains one of those frontier superstitions that specialists still examine with a mix of amusement and intrigue. Perhaps the soft root beds simply created more comfortable rest, or perhaps the belief itself eased troubled minds. In the freezing dark, even tiny reassurances matter. You rise again, brushing off stray needles. Your bed is complete, ready for the long night ahead. You kneel by the fire once more, warming your hands. The flames hiss softly as a new log shifts in the embers, sending sparks upward in tiny spirals that vanish into the darkness. You breathe in slow and deep, letting the warmth seep into your chest. The cold around you has not disappeared. It presses gently at your shoulders, at your knees, at the edges of your boots, but it no longer feels overpowering. You have carved out comfort where comfort rarely exists. You look at the pine bed again, its woven surface a mosaic of green and shadow. It looks humble, but inviting. You lift one more bough and place it neatly along the top, smoothing it like a blanket. The forest rustles around you. The night deepens. Your fire warms the air in small waves, each one brushing your face like a quiet reassurance. You rise again, brushing off stray needles. Your bed is complete, ready for the long night ahead. You kneel by the fire once more, warming your hands. The flames hiss softly as a new log shifts in the embers, sending sparks upward in tiny spirals that vanish into the darkness. You breathe in slow and deep, letting the warmth seep into your chest. You stand for a moment, letting the scene settle. Then you lower yourself slowly onto the pine boughs, feeling them cradle your weight. Their gentle fragrance rises as your body warms them. The night air feels calmer now, quieter, as if acknowledging the work you have done. This is how the mountain men slept on countless nights, relying not on luxury but on skill, instinct, and a careful partnership with nature. A simple bed of branches, a sheltering log, a fire burning close by, all small pieces of survival arranged with thoughtful hands. You close your eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the fire wash over your cheeks. The forest shifts and sighs around you. You are no longer just a traveler. You are part of this place, resting the way the old trappers did, trusting the simple, ingenious bed beneath you to carry you through the cold. What you need now is insulation, the kind the mountain men trusted every single winter. Buffalo robes, elk hides, deer blankets, layers of fur that turned sleeping in the Rockies from torment into something just barely manageable. You stand, brushing stray needles from your coat, and move toward your pack. The night has deepened, the sky above a vast sweep of ink dotted with scattered stars. The cold air nips at your face as you rummage through what you imagine a trapper would have carried. Mountain men rarely wandered without at least one heavy robe, and a well-known detail from accounts of the fur trade comes to mind. Hunters often praised buffalo hides as the warmest bedding a wandering soul could ever hope for. When properly tanned and thick with winter fur, a single robe could weigh over 50 pounds, but protect like nothing else on earth. Even in brutal cold, a man wrapped tightly in one could feel heat linger long after the fire died. You unfold an imagined hide in your hands, feeling the dense fur brush against your gloves. It's heavy, almost unwieldy, but reassuring in its weight. You spread it over your pine bough mattress, the fur's softness catching the firelight in muted golden glints. The blanket drapes across the branches like a dark, warm wave. You press your palm into it and feel the warmth building slowly as your hand sinks into the thick fibers. As you smooth the hide across the bed, an unusual memory flickers up, something you once read in a frontier memoir that always made you smile. One trapper claimed that the best sleeping hides were stolen from wolves, who had stolen them from other wolves. In his words, a wolf pelt already shaped by nature's fiercest predators carried a kind of mountain magic that made it warmer than anything tanned by human hands. Whether he meant it as a joke or as a sincere belief is unclear, and modern readers still scratch their heads at the remark. Perhaps it revealed more about the man's sense of humor than any practical frontier truth. Still, the idea adds a strange charm to the quiet work of arranging furs in the cold. You adjust the buffalo robe so its thicker edges face the windbreak. You tuck one side under a corner of the boughs, creating a slight lip that will keep drafts from sneaking in. The fire crackles as you work, sending small sparks swirling upward in lazy arcs. The warmth touches your face, then fades when the wind shifts. It reminds you that these hides are not just comfort, they are survival. As you kneel by the bedding, you think about how mountain men layered their coverings. Deer or elk blankets on the bottom for softness, thicker bison robes on top for warmth, sometimes even an additional layer of fox or coyote fur draped over the shoulders. One experienced frontiersman once wrote in his letters that a traveler could sleep warm in almost any temperature if he had enough layers of hide. Yet he admitted in the same breath that carrying them all felt like hauling half the forest on his back. Modern researchers occasionally discuss whether his exaggeration was intentional or simply the natural grumbling of a man who spent too many winters under too many furs. But whatever they believe, the principle stands. Layers mattered. You test the robe by lowering your weight into it. The hide gives a slight resistance, then embraces you with slow, steady warmth. The pine boughs beneath flex softly, and the air trapped between the layers begins to do its quiet work. You run your fingers along the fur, feeling the dense undercoat and the coarse guard hairs above. It is not luxurious in the modern sense, but out here, luxury is defined differently. Anything that keeps your body heat from escaping becomes priceless. The fire pops behind you, sending a tiny ember skipping across the snow. It hisses and dies immediately. You glance back at it and feel a pang of understanding. This little flame, as comforting as it is, cannot keep you warm through the entire night. The hides must do the rest. You adjust the robe again, pulling it higher at the back, creating a kind of pocket that your shoulders can sink into. You imagine a trapper doing this same motion after a day of trudging through chest-deep snowdrifts with traps frozen solid in their creeks. The exhaustion must have been immense, yet the bedding ritual offered a small sense of order in a world ruled by chaos. You sit at the edge of your sleeping place and pull your coat tighter around your chest. Your breath trails in slow curls upward, swirling faintly in the fire's glow. The wind shifts again, brushing the robe with a soft ripple. You press your fingertips into the fur, grounding yourself in its warmth. It feels alive in a way, holding the ghost of the great animal it once belonged to. You think of another unusual belief recorded in old trapping journals. Some frontiersmen insisted that sleeping under bear hides made a person dream more fiercely, as if they carried the spirit of the animal into the night. Others swore bare fur kept nightmares away entirely. Folklorists continue to argue about whether these claims represent genuine superstitions or simply the creative storytelling of men who spent too many nights talking only to the fire. Either way, it reveals how deeply they experienced their relationship with nature, even in sleep. You lie back again fully this time, letting your body settle into the layered softness. Warmth rises slowly from the robe, spreading across your back and shoulders. The pine boughs cradle you delicately, lifting you just enough that the ground's freezing grip cannot reach you. The fire's faint glow paints your surroundings in copper and shadow. The forest hums gently, its nighttime language soft and unhurried. You pull one edge of the robe over yourself, feeling its weight settle comfortably across your chest. It is a weight that promises survival, a weight mountain men cherished even when it made travel cumbersome. As the cold eddies around you, the hide becomes a small world within a larger, harsher one. You close your eyes briefly, letting the warmth build. The wind whispers through the trees, brushing your cheeks with cool fingers. The fire shifts again, sending a gentle wave of light across your bedding. Wrapped in fur, resting on pine, protected by fire, you begin to understand why the mountain men trusted these layers as if they were companions in the night. The world outside may be frozen, vast and indifferent, but here in your little corner, warmth grows, steady and patient. You adjust the robe one last time, drawing its edge snug around your shoulder. The night feels calmer now, more familiar. The mountains have not softened, but they have accepted your presence for the moment. You breathe in the scent of pine and smoke, and let the warmth hold you. You shift gently beneath the buffalo robe, and tilt your head toward the distant glimmer of starlight reflecting off a frozen riverbed. Even from here, you can hear the faint, brittle rustle of ice shifting as the current pushes beneath its shell. The sound is sharp and strangely musical, a reminder that water never fully sleeps, even in the deepest cold. You rise from your bedding with slow, measured movements, feeling the weight of the hide slide from your shoulders. The fire still flickers steadily behind you, but the cold nudges your skin the moment you step away from its glow. You make your way toward the river's edge, drawn by the pale light dancing across the ice. Mountain men often camped near waterways, not out of comfort but necessity. A widely accepted historical observation tells us that these trappers relied heavily on rivers for navigation and fresh water, even though icy banks were some of the coldest places to sleep. Water meant food, pathways, and orientation. It also meant risk. You crunch through the snow, each step echoing softly across the quiet landscape. The trees thin as you approach the river, revealing an open stretch where moonlight spills freely across the frozen surface. The air here feels sharper, as if the river exhales cold more intensely than the wind itself. You crouch near the bank and touch the rim of ice with your glove. It creaks faintly under your pressure, a small warning disguised as a whisper. The snow along the river's edge lies in smooth layers, untouched except by the delicate tracks of a fox weaving upstream. You follow those tracks for a moment, letting your imagination drift the way the mountain men must have, always measuring the signs of life around them. You picture a trapper kneeling here, cupping water from a small hole in the ice, steam rising from his breath as he listened to the groaning river beneath him. As you stand, an unusual memory rises from something you once read in a faded trapping account. One old frontiersman insisted that sleeping too close to rushing water caused strange dreams, claiming the river's voice seeped into a sleeper's mind. He believed it whispered stories of creatures far beneath the ice. Some readers of his journal later speculated whether he had experienced mild hypothermia or simply possessed a poetic streak. No one today can confirm the true nature of those nighttime visions, but the idea lingers in your thoughts as you listen to the icy murmurs under your boots. You step back from the fragile bank and walk along the curve of the river, looking for a place where a camp could be safely tucked. Not too close, not too exposed. Mountain men developed a keen sense for this balance. They needed access to water for drinking, cooking, and tending traps, Yet sleeping directly beside it often guaranteed the coldest night imaginable. Cold sinks downward, pulling toward low places, and river valleys collect that cold like a bowl. You find a shallow rise along the bank and climb onto it. From here, the river sits just below, glinting under the moon. You breathe in deeply, and the icy air stings your lungs. You pull your coat tighter and look around. This raised spot feels safer, warmer by a small but noticeable margin. It gives enough distance from the river's chill, while still letting you hear its steady, comforting rhythm. A cluster of spruce stands behind the rise, their branches creaking gently. You step toward them and touch one trunk, feeling the frozen texture beneath your glove. Many trappers preferred to sleep near rivers because game often traveled these routes, leaving fresh tracks for morning hunts. A practical routine grew from this, though some modern interpreters of frontier life question whether it gave the trappers any significant advantage or simply became habit. The historical record leaves room for interpretation, and specialists continue to discuss the matter with lively curiosity. You crouch again near the rise, imagining how a mountain man might prepare his bedding here. The pine boughs you gathered earlier would go down first, then the heavy robe, angled slightly away from the river to avoid the chill. The fire would sit just far enough from the water to avoid sudden gusts, but close enough to reflect off the icy surface, giving a faint illusion of double warmth. You can almost see that mirrored glow now, a small orange twin flickering on the frozen river. You step toward a small drift and scoop up a handful of powdery snow. The crystals sparkle in your palm, then melt slowly into cool droplets. You rub them between your fingers and watch the water cling to your glove before freezing again. Everything here happens at the pace of winter. Slow, quiet, persistent. A breeze rolls across the river, humming low as it brushes the ice. You feel it tug lightly at your coat and hear it slide beneath the trees. The cold from the river is different from the cold on the higher slopes. It feels flatter, heavier, as if it wants to settle around your ankles and climb upward. You step back toward the fire's glow, understanding why mountain men treated rivers with a mix of reliance and caution. Necessary, yes, but unforgiving. As you walk away from the water, the forest seems to exhale, welcoming you back with softer air. The fire crackles when you return, sending a warm pulse against your shins. You lower yourself near your bedding and take one last look toward the river's pale shimmer in the distance. Its voice remains steady, a slow, icy murmur threading through the night. You sit back on the buffalo robe, letting its weight press comfortably against your shoulders. The pine boughs beneath shift slightly, adjusting to your movements. The fire glows warmly, painting your surroundings in amber light. You feel its comfort again, deep and grounding. Sleeping near water was always a gamble for the mountain men, a trade between convenience and cold. But they learned the patterns of rivers, studying how wind, ice, and landscape shaped the night. You feel a small connection to their quiet wisdom now, as you settle deeper into your bedding, letting the rhythmic pulse of the distant river become a gentle reminder that life continues even beneath frozen surfaces. You breathe in the scent of pine and smoke, and the night folds around you with quiet patience. You ease yourself upright on the pine boughs, feeling the warmth of the buffalo robe linger on your shoulders before the cold sneaks back in. The fire burns low now, a soft reddish glow rather than the lively flames of earlier, and its warmth reminds you that knowledge was just as essential to the trappers as skill. Much of what they learned came not from books or maps, but from listening to others around trading posts, absorbing small scraps of wisdom passed between men who had survived the mountains long enough to speak about it. You step toward the fire and stir the embers gently with a stick. Sparks leap upward in tiny spirals before fading into the dark. The air feels still for a moment, and that stillness pulls your mind toward memories of the trading posts scattered across the frontier. These places were hubs of stories, warnings, and rough advice. A commonly referenced point among historians notes that rendezvous gatherings each summer acted as the trappers' version of a school. Not a school with desks or rules, but one where every conversation carried lessons carved from winter hardship. A flick of the wrist, showing how to set a trap. A quiet admission of a mistake that almost cost a life. A warning about where the snow fell deepest. You imagine yourself wandering into one of those posts, the door creaking inward, the smell of smoke and animal hides swirling around you. Men hunched at rough tables trading tales of frozen nights. Someone muttering that if your boots froze while you slept, you should warm them against your chest rather than near the fire, because the sudden heat could crack the leather. Another voice insisting that sleeping too close to your pack invited rodents to chew through it in search of warmth. You picture yourself leaning against a wooden beam, absorbing every scrap of their hard-earned knowledge. A brief smile crosses your face as you recall one particularly strange piece of advice recorded in an old journal. A trapper claimed that rubbing the inside of a buffalo robe with tiny sprigs of sagebrush helped keep the fur soft and made the sleep warmer. Whether he discovered this by accident or believed the sage carried some kind of protective spirit remains unclear. Collectors who examined his journal years later found the note so odd that they debated whether it was a frontier trick or simple superstition. Even now, the idea feels both whimsical and oddly practical in a landscape where every small comfort mattered. You step toward a nearby pine and brush your fingertips along the bark, grounding yourself in the present. The fire hums behind you, a low, whispering crackle. You take a slow breath, thinking about the stories that must have passed through those trading posts. Some were truth, some exaggerated, and some woven together from memory and loneliness. Yet every bit of it helped shape how a mountain man prepared for nights like this one. As you move closer again to your fire, you picture a grizzled trapper leaning across a rough counter, his beard dusted with snow, offering advice in a low voice. Something like this: choose a sleeping spot with branches overhead, but not too many, because heavy snow can snap them and send them crashing down in the middle of the night. That little caution appears in several accounts, mentioned again and again by men who had heard cracks above them before a heavy limb plunged toward their camps. Whether every story was true or not, the warning clearly stuck. You sit beside your bedding and run your hands over the buffalo robe. The fur feels warm where your body rested earlier, but the edges have cooled. You pull it closer around you and settle near the fire once more. As you stare into the glowing embers, you realize that mountain men carried those spoken lessons with them across every mile of wilderness. Their survival depended on it. Written records were rare, and even when men could write, frozen ink made journaling difficult in winter. So wisdom was spoken, then carried in memory. A sound rustles through the trees behind you, light and cautious, like a creature picking its way through snow. You turn your head slowly, listening. The noise fades, then returns with soft crunches. Probably a deer or a fox. You stay still, watching the shadows flicker at the edge of the firelight. Mountain men learned from the older trappers to recognize the sound of each animal at night. Deer stepped lightly and paused often. Elk swept their hooves more heavily through the snow. Cougars moved with an uncanny silence that made the hair on the back of a man's neck rise. You tilt your head and listen again, remembering a curious bit of oral advice that circulated through several accounts. Some trappers swore that if you heard 3 steps in a perfect rhythm at night, you should sit up immediately. According to them, predators sometimes paced in regular beats before circling. Scholars who have reviewed these stories argue among themselves about whether this pattern actually happened or whether it grew from a few isolated encounters. You sit beside your bedding and run your hands over the buffalo robe. The fur feels warm where your body rested earlier, but the edges have cooled. You pull it closer around you and settle near the fire once more. As you stare into the glowing embers, you realize that mountain men carried those spoken lessons with them across every mile of wilderness. Their survival depended on it. Written records were rare, and even when men could write, frozen ink made journaling difficult in winter. The sound fades entirely. Whatever creature wandered nearby has moved on. You lean back on your hands and breathe in slowly, letting the cold air fill your lungs. The firelight glows across the snow like a warm patch in an otherwise silver world. You adjust the robe again and sit a little closer to the flames. You picture yourself inside a trading post lodge once more, surrounded by the low murmur of voices, crackling firewood, and the clatter of men preparing gear for the journey back into the mountains. You can almost hear their overlapping conversations. One man advising another to dry his socks close to the coals but never directly above them, because steam trapped in the fabric could refreeze later and chill the skin worse than before. Another man shaking his head, insisting the best nights of sleep came from resting with your feet toward the fire so your boots stayed thawed. Others arguing over whether to sleep with their rifles at arm's reach or keep them tucked away from sparks that might burn the wood. You feel yourself smiling again. So many small rituals, each one shaped by experience and memory. Even now, the frontiersman's whispered advice lives on in the quiet spaces between the crackling logs and the distant sigh of the wind. You take a slow sip of cold air and let the thoughts settle. The world around you feels older now, more grounded, as though the spirits of those trappers linger in the echoes of their warnings. Their shared knowledge helped countless men survive in places like this, long before you stepped into these mountains to understand their world. You draw your robe closer as the cold presses around you again. The fire burns low but steady, and the pine boughs beneath your bedding release a soft fragrance each time you shift. You settle deeper into the warmth and let your imagination rest for a moment in the glow of that old trading post wisdom. You sense how much was passed from voice to voice, from one weary traveler to another, in simple exchanges that carried the weight of life and death. The night deepens, the forest settles, your fire breathes gently, and you feel just a little less alone. You settle close to the fire again, pulling the buffalo robe around your shoulders as the flames pulse softly in the darkness. The warmth touches your face in gentle flickers, but the shadows beyond remain deep and watchful. You realize that fire, for all its comfort, is also a responsibility. Mountain men treated it almost like a living companion, one that needed tending, guarding, and sometimes restraining. A flame could keep you alive or betray you. It all depended on how well you understood its moods. You lean forward and feed a thin log into the embers. The fire brightens, the light blooming into a warm, steady glow. As it does, a clear historical insight comes to mind. Trappers in the Rockies often slept with their faces turned toward the fire, not for dramatic warmth, but because the shifting light allowed them to notice approaching animals or sudden threats. Their nights were part sleep, part alertness. They could never fully relax, not even under the thickest robes. You watch the flame rise and fall. The sound is faint, like paper crinkling. Through the years, men who roamed these mountains learned how to balance the fire so it neither roared too loudly nor died too quickly. Too much flame drew attention. Too little meant waking in the grip of the cold. You understand that delicate balance now, sensing how the fire becomes both comfort and warning. You shift on the pine boughs and glance at the surrounding darkness. The shapes of branches sway above you, stirring shadows that resemble cautious animals sneaking along the tree line. The flicker of the fire makes the forest seem alive, breathing and shifting with each gust of wind. You draw the robe higher around your chest. A peculiar memory rises from something you once read about winter camps. One old frontiersman wrote that he believed the fire watched him as much as he watched it. He insisted that sparks sometimes burst almost deliberately, as if the flames had a personality of their own. Whether he meant this as a metaphor for loneliness or as a genuine wilderness superstition, no one today can say with confidence. Those who study such accounts still discuss whether remarks like that reflect poetic thinking or the weariness of isolation. The night grows colder, a deeper kind of quiet settling over the clearing. You sense the temperature dropping with each breath. The fire crackles and spits softly, releasing tiny sparks that swirl upward, then disappear into the freezing air. You instinctively lean closer, guarding the flame with your body each time the wind gusts. Mountain men did this too, cupping their hands around fragile embers during storms, coaxing them like precious seeds of warmth. A distant sound interrupts the quiet. Something snaps in the woods, maybe a branch sagging under ice. The noise is sharp, but brief. You lift your head, listening carefully. The fire pops again, but the forest beyond remains still. You settle your weight back into the robe, aware of the way the firelight paints moving patterns across the snow. You remember reading that many trappers arranged their camps so the fire sat slightly off to one side rather than directly in front of them. This prevented the fire from blinding them to the darkness beyond. A glowing flame might warm your face, but it also shrinks your night vision, making anything outside the circle harder to see. Researchers who study frontier life often debate just how widespread this practice was, but the logic behind it remains clear. Even warmth carried hidden dangers. You shift the firewood once more, coaxing the flames into a low, steady burn. The heat spreads in gentle waves across your hands and cheeks. This is not the roaring heat of a hearth, but a modest warmth that reaches only a few feet from the fire. Beyond that small bubble, the world remains freezing and impenetrable. You stretch your legs toward the flames and let the buffalo robe gather in folds around your hips. The fur feels warm from contact with your body, and you pull it tighter with a satisfied sigh. You feel the soft bounce of the pine boughs beneath you, their subtle shift releasing another faint breath of evergreen scent. The fire's glow becomes a soft orange pool, shimmering over your hands. You think about how mountain men sometimes woke every hour to add a stick to the flames, just enough to keep frost from creeping across their blankets. Some slept with small embers buried in shallow pits under their bedding, using the earth itself to trap the warmth. Others preferred to let the fire die low and relied entirely on their robes. Everyone had their own rituals, shaped by trial, error, and near misses. A sudden gust brushes across the clearing. The flames dip sharply. You instinctively shield the fire with your arm, leaning sideways to block the wind. The flame steadies. The embers flare again, glowing with renewed confidence. You sit back, pulling the robe around your shoulders. Then another thought drifts into your mind, something unusual you once encountered in a letter from an explorer. He wrote that on certain nights, when the cold felt especially sharp, the fire seemed to hum. He described a faint vibration in the air, as though the flame had a voice buried inside it. Modern specialists examining such accounts continue to wonder whether this was an auditory illusion caused by extreme cold or a poetic expression of a lonely traveler listening too closely to his own fire. Whatever the explanation, you almost hear that hum now as the flames flicker before you. The fire's light grows softer as the night deepens. You look around the clearing, noticing how quietly the world has settled. The branches sway less often. The wind grows more measured. The snow seems to hold its breath. You adjust the robe around your body, feeling warmth build slowly from within. You take a deep breath and close your eyes for a moment. The fire warms one side of your face while the cold brushes the other, creating a strange but soothing balance. This is exactly the experience the mountain men described. Half comfort, half vigilance. Sleep never came fully, but it came enough. You open your eyes again and watch another spark drift upward. The night remains dark and unknowable, but your fire glows with patient strength, needing nothing more than a few logs and your quiet attention. You settle back into the pine boughs, keeping the fire within your sight, letting its gentle glow guide you deeper into the night. The warmth and shadows blend together, shaping a quiet world where danger and comfort coexist in a single fragile circle. You sit quietly beside the fire, listening to its faint crackle as the night thickens around you. The forest beyond your little circle of warmth feels vast and unknowable. A dark world, layered with secrets that only reveal themselves through sound. You pull the buffalo robe higher around your shoulders and tilt your head slightly, letting your ears take the lead. This is how the mountain men survived nights like this one. Before sight, before tools, before anything else, they listened. The air is so still at first that you wonder if the world has paused. But then, gradually, the sounds rise like a slow tide. A soft sigh of wind moves through the pines. Snow settles from a high branch with a muffled thump. Something small scurries underneath a bush, its tiny feet crackling like bits of paper pressed into frost. These sounds blend together into a kind of wilderness lullaby, both calming and faintly eerie. As you listen, a well-known frontier observation returns to you. Mountain men often judged the safety of a camp by the nighttime soundscape. If the forest went completely silent, they grew wary. Stillness could mean predators were moving. It could mean the weather was about to change. It could even mean nothing at all, but the uncertainty gnawed at them all the same. Noise, gentle and scattered, meant life was going on as expected. You close your eyes for a moment, focusing on the rhythm of the woods. The wind changes direction, brushing cold fingers across your cheek before retreating. Somewhere far off, you hear the soft bark of a fox. The sound travels cleanly in the frozen air, slipping between trees and drifting toward your clearing before dissolving into quiet. You shift slightly on your pine bough bed, letting the needles rustle under you. The familiar scent of sap rises again, earthy and soothing. You feel the warmth of the fire on one side of your body and the cold on the other, a contrast that sharpens your senses. If you listen deeply, the forest seems to move around you like a great sleeping creature, its breath slow and measured. A tiny scraping sound catches your attention. You turn your head, scanning the thin line where firelight fades into shadow. The sound comes again, this time followed by a faint rustle. You lean forward slightly but remain calm. Small animals wander near fires often, drawn by curiosity or the promise of warmth. You picture a rabbit or perhaps a curious mink weaving through the underbrush, pausing, sniffing, darting away again. Your mind wanders to a peculiar anecdote you once read in an old trapping narrative. The author insisted he could predict the weather by listening to how owls hooted at night. He believed that a trio of evenly spaced calls meant snow, while an odd pattern meant clear skies. No one today is entirely sure if that belief arose from genuine observation or simply a man's personal myth carried through long winters. Those who analyze such accounts today still find themselves divided, intrigued by the thin line between frontier superstition and authentic backwoods knowledge. You hear no owls tonight, but the silence between wind gusts feels full of its own quiet meaning. The fire pops again, sending a bead of sap bursting into the air with a faint hiss. The sound startles a small creature nearby, and you hear it dart quickly across the snow, its rapid footsteps fading into the trees. You smile slightly. The forest is awake in its own way, even in winter. A deeper sound emerges next, slow and steady, perhaps the creaking of a tree shifting under the weight of accumulated snow. You listen carefully. The sound repeats, long and drawn out, like an old hinge groaning. You imagine the tree's trunk expanding and contracting with the temperature swings, adjusting its posture in the cold night. This heavy creak was something mountain men often described in their journals. They learned to distinguish between the natural settling of trees and the footsteps of larger animals, a skill that could mean the difference between rest and danger. You take a slow breath, letting the cold air settle deep in your lungs. The night feels dense, layered with movement and stillness for you to decipher. Every sound arrives with crisp clarity, each one giving you tiny clues about the world around you. Then it comes, a soft crunch in the snow, gentle but intentional. Not the rapid scurry of a small creature, but a measured step. You sit a little straighter, your senses sharpening. Another crunch follows, closer this time. The rhythm feels too deliberate to be chance. You turn your head toward the trees, trying not to disturb the stillness. Your fire flares slightly as if in response, tossing a wave of warm light toward the shadows. You see nothing at first, only the vague shapes of trunks and branches. But the sound continues for a few steps, then stops. You wait. These are the moments mountain men described often, the moments when the darkness felt thick with possibility. Sometimes the night visitor was merely a deer. Sometimes it was an elk searching for a patch of open ground. And sometimes, though less often, it was a predator gliding through the snow with quiet intelligence. You stay still, allowing the darkness its secrets. Whatever moved has paused now, no longer stepping, perhaps watching. After a long stretch of silence, you hear a faint exhale, almost like a sigh. Then the steps resume, moving away this time, lighter, more relaxed. Soon the sound fades entirely, swallowed by the forest. You release a breath you did not realize you had been holding. The fire crackles softly, as though pleased with itself for sending enough light to keep danger at bay. You relax into your robe again and let the warmth settle around you. As you do, a curious bit of wilderness lore returns to your thoughts. Some trappers claimed they could hear snow falling long before it touched the ground. They insisted that certain storms announced themselves with a kind of soft whispering, a faint hiss that filled the treetops. Researchers who examined these accounts have offered different interpretations over the years, wondering whether the men were hearing subtle wind shifts or simply translating silence into imagination. The debate continues, mirroring the uncertainty of nights like this. You tilt your face upward and listen. The sky is silent for now, though the clouds shifting above you hint at a coming storm. You feel the change in the air, the subtle shift in pressure that makes your skin prickle. The quiet grows heavier, more expectant. You sit beside your fire, wrapped in your robe, surrounded by the layered voices of the forest. Some sounds soothe, some warn, some simply fill the night with presence. All of them tell the story of a wilderness that never truly sleeps. And as you settle deeper into your bedding, you feel yourself becoming part of that story, one quiet breath at a time. You ease yourself deeper into the robe, letting the fire's glow soften the edges of the night. But you know too well that warmth is never guaranteed here. A sudden storm, a wind shift, or even a few carelessly chosen steps can change everything. Your mind drifts to the idea of shelter, especially the kind mountain men built when conditions turned harsh enough to strip away every comfort. One of the cleverest shelters they improvised came not from canvas or hide, but from the very snow you see piling softly around you now. You rise from your bedding and take a few steps into the clearing. The snow beneath your boots gives with a distinct, compacted crunch. You kneel and scoop some of it into your hands, feeling its powdery texture. It pours between your fingers like cold sand, then clumps together when pressed. The moment you feel that bond, the thought becomes clear. This is the kind of snow the old trappers used when they were caught far from camp or when storms arrived without mercy. A widely recognized detail in frontier lore tells us that seasoned mountain men sometimes carved emergency snow shelters during the worst blizzards. These makeshift dens, though crude compared to the structures of indigenous peoples who mastered winter living, still offered precious insulation. Snow, despite its chill, traps air effectively. If shaped correctly, it becomes a protective barrier rather than a threat. You brush your glove across the ground, clearing a small circle. The fire glows behind you, its warmth faint at this distance. Your breath curls in pale ribbons as you stand and wander slightly farther from camp, searching for a deep drift. You find one near the base of a large spruce, its trunk bowed with the weight of white layers. The drift rises in a smooth mound, almost to your waist. You press your hand into its surface. The snow gives slowly, resisting just enough. Perfect. You take the butt of your glove and begin packing the surface, firming the outer edge. As you work, you remember an unusual note from a trapper's winter account. He wrote that he believed a snow den worked best if built on the north side of a tree, claiming that it trapped moonlight and made the interior glow faintly. Whether he truly experienced such a glow or simply embellished for effect remains uncertain. Specialists today still scratch their heads at that line, unsure whether to interpret it as poetic imagery or literal observation. You move around the drift, packing snow with rhythmic motions. Your hands grow numb even through the gloves, but you continue. A small doorway begins to take shape at knee height. You hollow it with careful scoops, pushing snow back and compacting it again to strengthen the walls. The den grows slowly, a rounded pocket carved into the drift. The entrance stays small, just enough for you to crawl through. Small openings keep cold air from pouring in. Mountain men knew this instinctively long before scientific explanations made their way into textbooks. You pause and sit back on your heels, breathing through a slight chill that seeps down your spine. The den's interior is tight, barely enough room to curl up, but the moment you duck your head inside, you sense the difference. The wind fades to a faint whisper. The air grows still, dense, strangely quiet. For a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. You sit inside the small chamber, your knees tucked up, the pine scent from the nearby tree drifting through the doorway. The snow walls glow faintly, reflecting what little moonlight presses through the entrance. The effect is calming, almost dreamlike. You understand now why some frontiersmen called snow shelters winter caves, places where the storm could howl outside while the inside remained hushed and protective. You crawl back out and stand, brushing snow from your clothes. As you do, a distant memory surfaces from a modern historian's commentary you once heard. He mentioned that some researchers remain divided about how often mountain men actually used snow shelters, arguing that the physically demanding nature of carving them made them impractical except in desperate situations. Others countered that survival often required precisely that kind of desperate labor. The debate still lingers, much like the cold wind skimming the snow around your boots. You circle the shelter again, admiring its simple ingenuity. A dome of white, breath-warmed inside, storm-proof outside. Snow falls gently from above, collecting along the curve of the structure like delicate lace. You run your fingers across the outer surface. The snow is firmly packed, almost icy. Its solidity reassures you. Nearby, the wind picks up, carrying a cold edge sharp enough to sting your cheeks. You pull the robe tighter as you return toward the fire. The moonlight shimmers on the snow behind you, reflecting off the rounded shelter you carved. It looks small but remarkably sturdy, a quiet reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, protection can be shaped from the very thing that threatens you. You settle beside the fire again, stretching your hands toward its glow. The warmth wraps your fingers slowly, almost reluctantly. The pine boughs beneath your bedding rustle when you shift, releasing that evergreen scent that feels both soothing and ancient. You picture a mountain man in a blizzard, his beard stiff with frost, crawling into a snow shelter like the one you built, the storm screaming beyond, the world buried in white. But inside, a pocket of stillness, a heartbeat of warmth, a temporary sanctuary where the cold could not reach him. You close your eyes briefly and imagine the hush of such a place. You understand now why improvising shelters became a skill worth mastering. Out here, the difference between shelter and exposure is measured in minutes, not hours. The fire burns steadily, offering its glow. The forest hums faintly. Your snow den sits quietly in the distance, its rounded shape blending naturally with the landscape. For now, you remain in the open, listening to the night soften around you, but you carry the knowledge of that shelter like a hidden warmth in your chest. The mountains demand creativity, and tonight you've answered with a small piece of winter craft shaped from silence and snow. You sink down beside your bedding again, letting the fire warm your shins while the cold brushes your back like a slow-moving shadow. You pull the buffalo robe around you and think about another simple truth the mountain men understood deeply. Sometimes the best source of warmth wasn't fire, wasn't hides, wasn't even shelter. It was another body. The idea feels almost obvious now, but in a lonely mountain winter, it carried layers of practicality, awkwardness, and quiet acceptance. You lie back on your pine boughs and imagine the situation clearly. Two exhausted trappers, snow falling relentlessly, the fire struggling to stay alive under the weight of the wind, their hides not enough, their clothing soaked, their boots stiff as boards. In moments like these, sharing body heat was not a matter of pride, but survival. A commonly mentioned detail in frontier writings tells us that partners who trapped together often slept side by side, especially during bitter storms or after crossing freezing rivers. It wasn't an act of companionship so much as an agreement between two people who understood that warmth spread best when bodies shared it. Heat radiates, and in the Rockies, anything that radiated warmth was precious. You pull the robe tighter around your torso, imagining the closeness of another person in this vast, cold wilderness. For the trappers, this was routine, a practice as necessary as gathering firewood. Yet many of them wrote about it with a kind of embarrassed humor, as if acknowledging that winter erased certain boundaries they were otherwise eager to maintain. You smile faintly as you recall a peculiar recollection from a fur brigade traveller who once wrote that one partner refused to share a bedroll unless he slept on the outside, claiming he didn't trust the other man's elbows. Whether this was a complaint, a joke, or a gentle tease is hard to say, but the imagery lingers in your mind. These small human moments soften the harshness of the mountains, adding warmth of a different sort. Another story comes to you, one even stranger. A trapper claimed he slept best when positioned back to back with a companion because he believed aligning spines created a shared heat channel. The phrasing made later readers laugh, yet some winter camping enthusiasts still comment on how back-to-back sleeping conserves warmth more efficiently than many solo methods. Modern discussions have not reached a firm conclusion on whether such a technique has measurable benefits, and those who compare old accounts with modern studies continue to offer differing interpretations. You shift slightly, imagining the weight of a companion's warmth beside you. The pine boughs creak softly under your movement. The fire's glow deepens into a warm reddish pool, illuminating the edges of your robe. Out here, warmth doesn't just comfort, it stabilizes your entire being. You lean forward and feed another branch into the fire. The flames brighten and send a wave of warmth over your hands. Even now, with the fire burning well, you can feel the cold pressing against your ribs, your knees, the back of your neck. Sitting alone by a fire is only half warm. The trappers knew this deeply. You imagine two men huddled beneath the same bison robe, snow drifting over their shelter, while wolves howled in the distance. In those moments, pride surrendered to practicality. They pressed shoulders together, sometimes legs, the heat of one body amplifying the heat of the other. It wasn't comfortable. Exactly. It wasn't always pleasant, but it kept them alive. You stand and take a few steps toward the tree line. The night has grown even quieter, the cold tightening its grip on the world. Your breath forms slow, heavy clouds in the air. You peer into the darkness, hearing only the faint rustle of branches shifting under accumulated frost. When you turn back toward the fire, something about the clearing seems more intimate, smaller, warmer than it did moments ago. The idea of shared warmth lingers gently in your mind, reminding you that solitude and survival never matched well in the Rockies. The wilderness demanded cooperation in ways few men admitted during the daylight hours. You return to your bedding and sink into the robe, pulling it around your chest. You can almost feel how the old trappers arranged their sleeping spots. They would place hides underneath for insulation, then drape another layer over both bodies. They slept close not just for heat but for efficiency, conserving resources and reducing the amount of fuel needed to get through the night. A faint breeze blows across your cheeks. The fire sways, its embers glowing in patterns that mimic breathing. The cold around you sharpens for a moment, and you understand instantly why body sharing was not just a last resort but a well-practiced technique in the harsher seasons. You think again of the strange claim about aligned spines. The idea stays with you, its odd charm mixing with your own experience of the cold. Some frontier habits make perfect sense, only when you sit exactly where they sat, in the stillness of a frozen forest with night pressing close from every direction. You breathe deeply and feel your chest rise beneath the robe. The warmth grows around your core, but the cold tugs at your extremities. This too the trappers knew. Warmth is uneven, fickle, reluctant to spread, unless something helps draw it outward. The fire crackles again, tossing sparks into the night. The warmth touches your face in a soft pulse. You settle further into the bedding and close your eyes briefly, imagining a second body's warmth pressed near, sharing heat without a word spoken. Pure practicality, pure survival. The forest exhales with a quiet sigh. The mountains remain vast and merciless, but for a moment you sense the subtle bond that must have formed between men sharing a winter night. Not friendship necessarily. Not trust even. Just a mutual understanding built from cold, necessity, and the unspoken knowledge that no one survives these nights entirely alone. You open your eyes again and feel the fire's gentle warmth, the robe's softness, the pine bough's resilience beneath you. You understand something new about the old mountain men. Even the toughest among them relied on warmth that came not from the wild but from one another. In the deep silence of the Rockies, survival was a shared act. You lie beside your quiet fire for a moment longer, letting its warmth seep into your fingers, before remembering another valuable trick the mountain men relied upon when the cold grew too sharp for comfort. You sit up slowly, the buffalo robe sliding across your lap, and glance toward the ring of rocks surrounding your fire. Even now, the stones near the base glow faintly, holding the day's heat like small sleeping hearts. You move closer, brushing aside a drift of powdery snow. Warm stones were an old frontier remedy, as trusted as hides or shared heat, and tonight you want to understand how they used this simple gift from the earth itself. You reach toward a smooth stone near the fire's edge. Even through your glove, you can feel its warmth radiating softly. The heat doesn't burn, but it lingers, steady and patient. You turn the stone with your fingertips, exposing the side that has been closest to the flames. It glows a mild reddish tone, almost as if it remembers the fire more fondly than the wood does. A frequently mentioned practical insight from early winter travelers comes to mind. Many trappers heated stones before bedtime and slid them beneath their bedding or tucked them near their feet. The stones released gentle warmth throughout the night, buying precious hours of sleep before the cold reclaimed the world again. They used what the land gave them, finding in rock a kind of quiet resilience that matched their own. You lift the stone carefully and set it aside to cool slightly. Another stone catches your attention, this one flatter and smoother. You touch it lightly, testing its temperature. It is warm enough to comfort, but not so hot that it could scorch a hide. Perfect. You pull it out with your gloved hands and place it on a patch of snow. Steam rises in soft curls, twisting dreamily into the night air. The warmth dissolves some of the icy crust around it, releasing the scent of cold earth beneath. As you work, a curious little recollection surfaces, something you read long ago in a frontier reminiscence. One trapper claimed he believed stones from riverbeds held better heat than stones from dry ground, insisting they were water soaked with the sun. Whether this was a poetic exaggeration or a misunderstood observation remains a mystery. People who study frontier practices still discuss whether river stones truly differed, or if the man simply developed a personal preference born from habit. You gather several stones now, choosing them for size and shape. Some are round and heavy, others flat and broad. The fire flickers behind you, lighting the snow in warm gold and deep blue. You touch the stones one by one, feeling their varying degrees of heat. The warmer ones go onto a small patch of pine needles beside you. The cooler ones get nudged closer to the fire to absorb more warmth. You take a moment to admire the process. Heating stones seems almost too simple, yet it worked brilliantly. You imagine a mountain man settling into his bedding after a long day of trekking through hidden ravines and frozen streams. He would slip one warm stone beneath his lower back, another by his feet, maybe one tucked inside a fold of his robe. These pockets of warmth could keep frostbite at bay, especially during the darkest hours when the temperature dropped sharply. You kneel and check another stone. Its surface crackles faintly as the heat within it meets the freezing air. You turn it over, feeling the contrast between the warm underside and the cooling top. The fire pops again behind you, sending a scatter of sparks skyward. The winter wind moves softly through the trees, stirring the scent of cold pine and smoke. You lift the stones one by one and place them strategically around your bedding. Two go beneath the pine boughs, near where your hips and lower back will rest. Another sits near the foot of the bed, ready to radiate heat through the robe. A fourth rests under your blanket's edge, waiting to warm your hands when the cold creeps in during the early hours. You pause then, considering the arrangement. It feels almost ritualistic, as if each stone must find its perfect place. The mountain men learned this through trial and error, adjusting their stones like a musician tuning an instrument. They knew that a poorly placed rock might roll away or cool too quickly, while a well-placed one could make the difference between shivering all night and sleeping soundly until dawn. As you settle into your robe and test the warmth from the first stone beneath you, you recall a scholarly discussion you once overheard about how effective these heated stones really were. Some researchers argued that their warming effect lasted only a brief period, barely long enough to matter. Others countered that in sub-zero conditions, even a short burst of warmth could ease a traveler into deep sleep, conserving precious energy. The debate remains unresolved, mirroring much of the uncertainty that surrounds frontier techniques. But feeling the warmth blooming beneath you now, you understand that usefulness often depends on circumstance rather than theory. You stretch your legs slowly, letting the hidden stones share their heat. The pine boughs respond softly, bending under your weight with a quiet, fragrant rustle. The fire's glow reaches you from the side, painting the world in amber glimmers and deep shadows. You take in the night once more, the sounds of the forest settling into stillness. Snow whispers as it falls through branches. A distant crack of shifting ice echoes faintly. The air feels dense and serene, as if the mountains themselves have drawn a deep breath and held it. Warm stones at your back, fur across your chest, fire at your side, pine beneath your body, all simple pieces, woven into one small system of survival. You stretch your legs slowly, letting the hidden stones share their heat. The pine boughs respond softly, bending under your weight with a quiet, fragrant rustle. The fire's glow reaches you from the side, painting the world in amber glimmers and deep shadows. You lie back fully now, your head resting near the pine's gentle slope. The warmth from the stones spreads through your muscles, guiding tension away from your spine. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the heat seep into places that the cold had stiffened. This was how mountain men outwitted the winter, not with brute strength, but with small, clever acts that gathered warmth from unexpected places. You feel the stones beneath you working their quiet magic. And slowly, the cold withdraws. You shift slightly on your warmed bedding, feeling the stones radiate their slow, calming heat, and your thoughts drift toward another kind of simple shelter the mountain men often built when they lacked time, energy, or perfect conditions. You rise slowly, brushing pine needles from your robe, and scan the clearing for long, straight branches. The moonlight spills through the treetops, revealing fallen limbs scattered like forgotten tools across the snow. A lean-to made from hides and poles was one of the most common shelters on the frontier, quick to assemble and surprisingly effective when the wind turned harsh. You step toward a cluster of downed branches and test each one by lifting it slightly. Some crumble from rot, others are far too thick. You choose a handful of strong, flexible poles about the length of your outstretched arm. Their surfaces are cold and rough beneath your gloves, the bark gripping your fingertips like old, weathered skin. With your arms full, you carry them back toward the fire, your breath curling into the air like pale ribbons. A widely recognized detail from accounts of frontier travel comes to mind. Trappers often built lean-tos by anchoring poles against a tree trunk and draping a buffalo hide or canvas over them, creating a slanted wall that shielded them from the wind. It wasn't a full shelter, not even close, but in a world where storms appeared without warning, a slanted hide could mean the difference between discomfort and danger. You plant one end of a sturdy pole into the snow and rest its other end against a thick pine trunk. The angle looks right, steep enough to shed snow, but wide enough to crawl under. You press the pole down with your weight to anchor it more securely. The fire crackles softly behind you, sending shadows dancing across your simple frame. You set a second pole beside the first, then a third, creating a rib-like structure leaning against the tree. As you work, a strange memory surfaces from an old trapping diary. The writer insisted that the best lean-tos were made using poles cut from trees struck by windstorms because, according to him, those branches already knew how to lean. Whether he meant this metaphorically or literally is unclear. Some enthusiasts of frontier lore still puzzle over what he intended, chuckling at the idea of branches holding secret knowledge of posture. You drape your imagined hide across the poles, pulling it tightly so it forms a taut, protective wall. The hide thumps lightly against the wood as you adjust it, the fur brushing your gloves with soft, muffled strokes. Snow shakes loose from the tree above, sprinkling your shoulders as though the forest approves of your handiwork. The lean-to takes shape quickly. Its slanted surface blocks the prevailing wind, casting a pocket of calm beneath it. You duck inside and kneel on the snow. Immediately, the air feels different. The world outside continues breathing its cold breath. But here, within your small shelter, the wind's voice fades. You can hear it outside, low and steady, but inside it becomes a distant murmur. You sit back on your heels and run your hand along the hide. Its surface feels warm compared to the frigid air. You imagine two trappers sitting under a similar structure, their boots steaming faintly, their breath fogging the air as they waited for the storm to break. A lean-to didn't solve every problem, but it made the night more bearable, especially when paired with a fire reflecting heat inward. You step back out and study your shelter from a short distance. The fire's glow illuminates the hide, turning it into a warm amber shape against the snowy dark. The slanted wall reflects heat downward, creating a small basin of warmth beneath it. The pine boughs beneath your bedding cushion the ground, the heated stones maintain their steady warmth, and now the lean-to holds back the wind. Each piece works together, a quiet harmony shaped from cold, wood, fire, and instinct. You return to the interior and sit again beneath the slanted hide. A drop of melting snow drips from the edge and lands near your knee with a soft tap. The scent of pine fills the air, mixed with the faint musk of the hide and the smoky breath of the fire nearby. You breathe in deeply, letting the scents anchor you to the moment. Another curious idea floats into your mind, something mentioned in a lesser-known memoir. The author wrote that some men kept small charms or tokens inside their lean-tos, believing the objects invited good dreams or safer sleep. Whether this tradition came from personal superstition or was influenced by interactions with indigenous neighbors is still a matter of discussion among those who study the period. Unfortunately, the author gave so little explanation that the meaning remains a small historical puzzle. You shift your posture again and feel the warmth drifting from the fire, captured gently by the hide and directed toward you. The lean-to creates a kind of quiet pocket, a hollow of comfort carved from nothing but branches and hide. You notice how the flame's reflections ripple across the fur, creating a soft, flickering dance. The mountains remain cold, the night remains deep, but inside your small shelter, you feel a kind of security that didn't exist just moments ago. You tighten the robe around your shoulders, letting the heat soak into your chest. Wind brushes the outer surface of the hide with a low, steady sound. The structure holds firm, flexing slightly with each gust. You press your palm against one of the supporting poles and feel the tension humming through it, the structure alive with the soft push and pull of winter air. You sit back, listening to the quiet beneath the lean-to. The warmth grows, the fire glows, the hide shifts gently with the breeze, the mountains exhale, and for the first time in a while, the cold seems less like a threat and more like a presence you've learned to negotiate. Little by little, through simple, practical decisions, you've created a refuge in the wild, a slanted wall of hide and poles, built with your hands and guided by the old wisdom of men who slept beneath these same stars. And now, with the shelter at your back and the fire before you, you feel night settling in with a gentler touch. You ease yourself back under the lean-to, letting the hide settle behind your shoulders as the firelight flickers across the snow. For a brief moment, Everything feels calm. The warmth radiates from your heated stones, the pine boughs cradle your weight, and the simple shelter shields you from the restless breeze threading through the trees. But as any mountain man knew, the Rockies never stay gentle for long. You lift your head slightly, sensing a change in the air. It begins as a distant murmur, a faint tension humming along the treetops. Then the temperature drops, not gradually but suddenly, like a curtain pulled tight around the clearing. You inhale sharply and feel the cold settle deep in your lungs. You recognize that shift. A storm is rising. You climb out from beneath the lean-to and scan the dark horizon. The stars that glittered moments ago have blurred into faint smudges. Thin streamers of cloud sweep overhead, gathering speed. The wind curls around your legs now, not playful anymore, but sharp, focused, gathering strength, as if the mountains themselves are preparing to shake. A commonly noted account from old winter journals comes to mind. Trappers often claimed they could sense storms before they formed, not by sight but by the feeling of pressure tightening against their skin. Some said the forest grew too quiet. Others said the air thickened. You feel both sensations now, and the hair at the back of your neck stirs. Little by little, through simple, practical decisions, you've created a refuge in the wild. A slanted wall of hide and poles, built with your hands, and guided by the old wisdom of men who slept beneath these same stars. Little by little, through simple, practical decisions, you've created a refuge in the wild. A slanted wall of hide and poles, built with your hands, and guided by the old wisdom of men who slept beneath these same stars. You move quickly to reinforce your lean-to. You press the hide tighter along the supporting poles and kick snow along its base to seal the lower edges. As you work, you recall a strange detail you once read in a trapper's notebook. He claimed to have survived a storm by singing to the wind, believing the sound tricked the gusts into passing him more gently. The wind rises again, louder this time, bending the pine branches overhead. You hear them groan under the pressure, each bending arc releasing a low rumble. Snow shakes loose in heavy clumps, landing with dull thuds around your camp. You feel the urgency of the moment settling into your bones. Storms in the Rockies could build in minutes, swallowing an entire valley under roaring winds and blinding snow. The wind crashes into the clearing again, this time with the full force of the storm behind it. Snow blasts sideways, gritty and sharp as it pelts your coat. You duck into the lean-to, pulling the hide down low as icy flakes swirl inside. The structure groans under the pressure but holds firm. You brace one arm against the nearest pole, feeling it tremble beneath your hand. Whether it was superstition, delirium, or simply a man's attempt to entertain himself in terror, modern readers still debate the origins of that tale. But you can almost imagine him, crouched under a flimsy shelter, voice quivering as the storm roared around him. Inside your lean-to, the sound is muted to a low growling roar. You feel the storm in your chest more than your ears, each gust pushing against the hide, as though the night itself is trying to shove its way inside. The cold pours in through every gap, brushing your cheeks with icy fingertips. You press your robe tighter and shift your weight to adjust the heated stones beneath you. Their warmth has dimmed slightly but still offers a stubborn glow against the creeping chill. You curl your legs closer and let the hide settle around you like a heavy wing. The fire outside flickers violently. You watch its glow pulse in rapid beats, shrinking and bursting back alive as the wind wrestles with it. The sound of the storm becomes deafening. Wind shrieks through the branches like a chorus of distant voices. Snow whips across the ground, scouring the surface in wild, darting patterns. Whatever the truth, their fear comes alive in the howling wind outside your shelter. Another memory rises, this one about a winter expedition, where two trappers described a storm so violent it buried their fire entirely beneath drifting snow. They dug it out 3 times before surrendering and retreating into a crude shelter much like yours. Some historians examining their journals have argued that their description may have been embellished, while others believe the storm conditions described match historical blizzards known to sweep through the rocky passes. Minutes pass, or perhaps longer. Time bends under storms like this. The world shrinks to one small, trembling triangle of hide and branches. You listen carefully, feeling the pulse of the storm shift. The wind loses a little of its sharpness. The roar becomes a steady rush rather than a violent scream. You lift the edge of the hide cautiously. Snow pours down in heavy curtains, but the worst seems to be passing. The fire has dimmed to red embers, half buried in a small drift, but not extinguished. You smile despite the cold. The flame has endured. You crawl out from the lean-to, brushing snow from your sleeves. The storm still swirls, but its rage has softened into something manageable. The air feels crisp, almost brittle, and you know the temperature has dropped even more. The clearing glows faintly under the storm-muted moonlight. Your shelter stands firm, draped in snow like a natural part of the forest. You kneel beside the embers and coax them back to life with a small handful of twigs. The glow brightens, casting long shadows across the clearing once more. You pull the robe around yourself and breathe deeply. The storm has passed its peak, leaving behind a world quieter, heavier, blanketed in fresh white. And you, like the mountain men before you, have endured it. You rise slowly from beneath the lean-to, brushing clumps of snow from your sleeves as the storm's remnants swirl in lazy spirals across the clearing. The wind has eased into a soft hiss, and the fire glows once more with a modest, determined light. Your breath drifts upward in slow clouds as you step beyond the shelter to stretch your legs. The world looks reshaped, smoothed by a fresh blanket of snow that glistens under the muted sky. You listen for a moment, letting the quiet settle into your ears after the wild rush of the storm. As you breathe deeply, another thought surfaces, one rooted in the ways mountain men learned to pick safe campsites almost without thinking. You walk toward the tree line, your boots sinking into soft snow with gentle crunches. Animal tracks appear here and there, scattered like notes in some forgotten winter melody. Elk prints, larger and deeper. Rabbit prints, light and frantic. Tiny mouse trails zigzagging like hurried scribbles. The patterns feel strangely reassuring. A widely acknowledged insight from frontier writings comes to mind. Seasoned trappers often trusted animal trails when choosing places to sleep. They believed that animals avoided areas prone to sudden danger, such as avalanche slopes or low pockets where cold air pooled mercilessly. If elk or deer regularly passed through a location, it was usually safe enough for a temporary camp. You step beside a fresh set of narrow hoofprints now, noticing how they weave through the trees and avoid certain dips in the terrain. You follow the tracks for a short distance, moving quietly through the newly fallen snow. The forest feels calmer now, and the air holds a crisp clarity that sharpens your senses. Snow-laden branches bend gracefully, forming archways under which you duck. The quiet is so complete that your footfalls feel almost intrusive. As you wander, an unusual recollection surfaces from a trapper's recollections you once read. The man insisted that certain animals, especially elk, could predict shifts in weather more accurately than any human. According to him, if he found elk bedding down early in the afternoon, he prepared for a hard night. If they wandered restlessly, he expected winds. This belief has drawn mixed reactions among those who examine frontier ecology today. Some argue that wildlife indeed responds instinctively to pressure changes. Others suspect the trapper was interpreting patterns where none truly existed. In the world of winter survival, instinct and guesswork often blurred together. You stop beside a cluster of spruce trees and crouch near the snow. A fresh set of tracks leads into a narrower passage between two boulders. You notice how the path curves gently, avoiding a steep embankment where snow lies piled in a way that suggests instability. Without needing to test it, you know stepping there might cause the mound to collapse. The animals avoided it automatically. You marvel at their intuition. You turn back toward your fire, tracing your own footprints. Your shelter appears as a small dark triangle beneath the pale branches, half buried in snow. The fire's orange glow flickers softly, casting warm ripples across the clearing. You kneel once more near the fire, feeding it a small log. The flames respond with a low, grateful roar. The warmth seeps into your fingers, easing the cold that clung to them as you followed the tracks. You stretch your hands toward the glow and feel the fire pulse gently against your palms. You sit back on the pine boughs, letting the heat spread through your limbs. As you settle, another curious bit of wilderness memory nudges its way into your mind. Some mountain men swore that sleeping near well-used animal trails brought better dreams. They believed that animals carried a kind of calm with them, leaving behind an invisible thread of ease along their routes. Whether this gentle notion emerged from true experience or from the long, lonely nights men endured out here remains uncertain. People who study frontier folklore today still puzzle over the origin of that belief, noting how deeply sleep and superstition intertwined on the edge of the wild. You rest your hand on the buffalo robe beside you, feeling the warmth rising from the hidden stones beneath. The fire crackles softly, the lean-to blocks the wind, and the scent of pine drifts through the cold air. The snow continues to fall lightly, tiny flakes drifting down like soft whispers. You look toward the animal tracks once more. The path disappears into the dark line of trees, a reminder that the forest has its own logic and rhythm. In following those small signs, you feel a quiet kinship with the trappers who once walked these same mountains, reading the land like a story whispered only to those who listened closely enough. You settle into your bedding, drawing the robe around your shoulders and letting the warmth gather. The night deepens, the fire glows steadily, and the animal-traveled ground beneath you feels strangely welcoming. In this vast wilderness, you realize, safety often hides in the footsteps of creatures who know the land far better than you ever will. You shift slightly beneath the buffalo robe, feeling the warmth of the stones fade into a gentle, dull heat. Outside the lean-to, the forest whispers in low breaths that rise and fall with the breeze. The storm has passed, but the cold has grown sharper, cleaner, almost brittle. The fire burns steadily now, small but confident, its glow flickering like a heartbeat against the snow. You stare into the flames and realize that the next task is not simply keeping the fire alive, but deciding how much fire you actually want. You sit up slowly, brushing loose flakes of snow from your sleeves. In your mind, you replay countless stories you've absorbed about trappers and the delicate dance they performed with their campfires. Too much flame, and you became a beacon in the night. Too little, and the cold gnawed at your bones until shivering overtook sleep. The old mountain men walked a thin line between warmth and discretion, and tonight you feel that same line tighten beneath your fingertips. You lean toward the fire and add a single thin branch. The flames rise, but not too high. The crackle is soft, gentle. You sit back and draw the robe close around your chest. A consistently cited observation from winter travelers tells us that trappers often built smoky fires deliberately, using damp wood or green bark to create a thin veil that masked their camp's silhouette. It wasn't always ideal for cooking or comfort, but the blue-gray haze helped keep them hidden from wandering eyes, both human and animal. You reach for a larger log, but hesitate. The night feels open around you, the quiet wide and deep. The thought of sending a tall plume of flame into that space feels unwise. You place the log down instead, choosing a smaller piece of wood and adding it carefully to the growing nest of embers. A faint trail of smoke curls upward. It moves lazily, drifting through the lean-to opening like a slow-moving ghost. You watch it for a moment, noting the way it catches the moonlight. This is the kind of fire the mountain men preferred when traveling alone. Just enough warmth to ease the cold, but not enough to shout their presence across the mountains. A peculiar memory flickers through your thoughts, drawn from an old diary written by a trapper who insisted that smoke could carry a man's worries straight into the sky. He wrote that he sometimes stared at the rising wisps until he felt lighter, emptied of the burdens he carried. Whether he was describing a real emotional practice or merely drifting into poetic territory has never been fully clarified. and those who've studied his entries continue to disagree about his intended meaning. Still, the image lingers with you now as you watch your own thin plume dissolve into the night. The wind shifts slightly, brushing smoke toward the lean-to. It swirls around your face, leaving a faint tang of charred pine on your tongue. You lean away and cough lightly. You wonder how the mountain men endured nights of smoky fires without complaint. Perhaps they grew used to the sting, perhaps they no longer noticed it at all. You stand and move to adjust the lean-to's hide, lifting one corner to allow more ventilation. The forest breathes around you in slow, rhythmic gusts. The flames flutter with each current of air but remain steady. You lower the hide again and return to your bedding, the stones beneath the pine boughs still offering a stubborn whisper of warmth. A new sound brushes your ear, a distant thump, followed by a brief gliding noise as something moves through the snow. You sit up slightly, alert but calm. You turn your head, listening carefully. The noise fades quickly, probably just a deer, or maybe a fox slinking along the trail you saw earlier. The fire crackles beside you, its small flames sending slender shadows stretching long across the snow. Your thoughts drift to another winter tale you once encountered, one describing a trapper who preferred to smother his fire entirely after nightfall, choosing darkness over visibility. He claimed he slept warmer without the shifting light, arguing that the psychology of flame distracted him instead of helping. However, others who commented on his unusually dark preferences were uncertain whether he was testing a personal theory or simply tired of tending fires. His practice sparked debate among later readers, with some seeing logic in his method, while others doubted its practicality. You imagine him now, bundled tight in furs, trusting only his own breath to warm him through long winter nights. You tuck your hands beneath the robe and flex your fingers to restore circulation. The firelight plays across your knuckles. Even now, with the storm past and the woods quiet, you sense how important it is to judge the fire's size correctly. Too little warmth, and sleep slides away from you. Too much, and the cold night watches your clearing more closely. You lean forward again, and gently rake the embers, exposing a new line of glowing coals. The heat pulses outward in soft waves. You build a small ring of thin twigs around it, stacking them lightly to strengthen the glow without attracting too much attention. The fire responds, brightening subtly, warming the air around your knees. You sit back and breathe slowly. Smoke drifts upward once more, twisting gracefully as it rises. The gentle shapes soothe you, reminding you of how the mountain men cultivated a relationship with their fires. They did not simply light them and walk away. They tended them, considered them, measured them. Fire, in those times, was not an accessory but a partner. The wind softens, brushing the trees in tender strokes rather than sharp gusts. The forest seems to settle again, the hush returning like a blanket drawn over everything. You pull the robe more securely around your shoulders and settle deeper into your bedding. The heat from the stones beneath you, though faint, mingles with the fire's radiance to create a pocket of comfort that feels almost luxurious against the cold world just beyond. You tilt your head back and study the sky. The storm clouds continue drifting apart, revealing patches of stars glimmering faintly. You feel the whole world opening again, breathing freely after the storm's heavy command. As you watch the sky, another unusual bit of frontier recollection comes to mind. Some trappers claimed that smoke drifting straight upward meant the night would stay calm, while smoke blown hard to the west foretold unsettled weather. Debates about the accuracy of this old rule persist, with some experts pointing to meteorological reasoning, while others dismiss it as coincidence layered with tradition. You glance at your own smoke now, rising gently in a slender column. It comforts you, even if you can't say why. You lower your gaze to the firelight again. The ember glow reflects warmly across the hide of your lean-to, making the shelter feel almost alive. The flicker of flame creates ripples of shadow and light that sway gently as you breathe. The entire scene feels quiet, intimate, and deeply connected to the countless winter nights lived by mountain men long before you. You place one final twig on the fire. The flames accept it with a soft hiss. The warmth spreads, steady and controlled. You settle into the robe, letting the pine boughs cradle your back, the stones warm your bones, and the fire maintain its quiet companionship. In this hush, you understand the trappers' careful decisions about their smoky fires, the balance they walked, the judgment they learned through cold trial and long habit. Here beneath the shifting stars, surrounded by snow and silence, the fire feels like a small miracle. Not too bright, not too faint, just enough to keep you warm while the night drifts deeper around you. You sink deeper into the pine boughs, letting the buffalo robe gather around your shoulders as the fire dwindles into a soft, pulsing glow. The night has grown quieter, colder, heavier. A stillness settles over the clearing, the kind that presses gently against your ears until even your own breaths seem louder than they should. You glance upward, noticing how the stars sharpen as the last scraps of cloud drift away. The air feels thin, brittle, as if a single loud sound might shatter it. You know this hour. Mountain men knew it too. It is the moment just before dawn, when the cold becomes its most merciless. The darkness is not at its thickest, nor the wind at its wildest, but the temperature drops with a kind of slow inevitability that seeps through hides, blankets, shelters, even bone. You feel it now in your fingertips, in the tip of your nose, in the faint tremble waking in your legs. You shift slightly and pull the robe closer. Beneath you, the heated stones still offer a whisper of warmth, but that whisper grows fainter by the minute. The pine boughs cradle you, yet even their evergreen resilience cannot fully keep the cold from rising. You exhale slowly, watching the steam float upward and vanish. A widely acknowledged detail in historical accounts comes to mind. Trappers noted that the hour before dawn was always the coldest, often by a noticeable margin. They described it as the moment when the night tightened its grip, stealing heat as if collecting a toll. Many wrote that they woke naturally at this time, not from noise or fear, but simply because the cold refused to let them sleep any longer. You feel that truth now curling around your ribs. You lift the hide slightly to let your hand rest on one of the stones. It is lukewarm at best, still helpful, but not enough to hold back the creeping chill. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the silence sink deeper into your awareness. The forest holds its breath with you. No birds stir yet, no branches fall, no rustling creatures press through the snow. Everything waits. Then, just when the quiet feels complete, you notice the faintest tremor of sound. At first, you think it is your heartbeat pulsing in your ears. Then you realize it is the fire, releasing a single soft crack, a delicate sound, but loud in the stillness. You lift your head slightly and watch a faint ember drift upward before fading into the dark. You breathe again, letting the cold settle around your body. You think of the mountain men who endured countless nights like this, curled beneath their robes, half asleep, half awake, waiting for the first hint of light. A strange story from an old winter journal surfaces. The writer claimed he believed dawn refused to break until the cold reached a specific depth, almost as if the world needed to stretch itself into discomfort before sunrise could be earned. Whether he meant this literally or simply as a poetic complaint, later readers still debate. Some think he was describing atmospheric shifts. Others assume he was expressing the exhaustion that winter carved into the human spirit. You smile faintly at the thought, though your lips feel stiff in the cold. The temperature dips further, and you tuck your chin against your chest. Your boots feel rigid now, their leather stiffened by frost. You wiggle your toes inside them, feeling only a slow, sluggish response. You adjust the robe more tightly around your legs, performing the same careful movements countless trappers made before you. They often wrote about how essential it was to shift positions during this hour. Too much stillness and frostbite crept silently upward. A light shiver moves through your body, not a harsh one, but a warning. You rub your arms through the hide, generating a small reservoir of warmth, The fire pulses behind you like a soft drumbeat. Its glow casts faint shadows that stretch long across the snow. Everything feels stretched, elongated, waiting. You tilt your head toward the tree line, listening for any sign of life. Eventually, you hear something faint, the tiny, rhythmic tapping of frost expanding inside a tree trunk. It clicks softly, like small pebbles falling on wood. The sound is subtle, but in this stillness, it feels almost intimate. Mountain men often mention this phenomenon, referring to it casually as the trees talking to each other. Whether they believed this literally or simply used it as a comforting metaphor remains unclear. Modern observers find charm in the notion, though opinions differ on whether the description was poetic or sincere. You shift again, letting the pine boughs crackle beneath your weight. The scent of crushed needles releases briefly into the air. That small burst of fragrance feels almost warm, as if memory itself can heat the air for a moment. And then, as you sit in the wavering half-light of dying embers, you begin to sense it. A faint thinning of darkness. Not brightness, not yet, but a kind of loosening. The sky above the treetops feels less like an abyss and more like a deep, muted blue. It is the earliest stage of dawn, the moment when night finally begins to relent. You breathe out slowly, letting the cold exit your lungs in a visible stream. This is the turning point, the moment the mountain men cherished even as they dreaded the climb into consciousness. When the first hints of light stirred, they knew they had outlasted another winter night. Every morning was a small victory. You lean closer to the fire and gently stir the embers. A curl of smoke rises lazily. You add a thin stick and watch the glow brighten. Dawn is not here yet, but it is close enough that the cold feels less like a threat and more like a final test. The fire warms your hands. The robe warms your shoulders. The sky warms your heart in the smallest possible way. And slowly, the coldest hour begins to loosen its grip. You sit very still beside the faintly glowing fire, feeling the slow retreat of the cold as dawn inches closer but not quite fast enough for comfort. Your breath drifts upward in pale ribbons, fading into the blue-tinged darkness. The pine boughs beneath you creak softly as you shift your weight. The buffalo robe hugs your shoulders, but despite its thickness, the cold keeps sneaking in through small openings, brushing your skin with delicate, icy fingertips. Your stomach tightens unexpectedly, a hollow twist that reminds you of another truth the mountain men faced every winter night: hunger. You place a hand across your midsection, feeling the emptiness beneath the layers. Eating properly made the difference between a tolerable night and a dangerous one. Mountain men knew that better than anyone. A broadly repeated detail from frontier accounts explains that without enough calories in your body before bed, warmth leaked away faster than you could trap it. Food was fuel in the most literal sense. Without it, even the heaviest robes and warmest fires struggled to keep a man alive until sunrise. You shift again and feel a faint tremor in your legs. Hunger always made the cold sharper. It sharpened the silence too, making each sound in the forest feel louder, more significant. You reach toward a small leather pouch near your bedding, imagining the kinds of provisions a trapper might have carried this time of year. Maybe dried venison, perhaps a chunk of hardtack so tough he would have to soften it over steam, or a strip of pemmican, dense and oily, offering a slow-burning heat once it settled in the belly. You lift the imaginary pouch and let it fall gently into the snow. Even the idea of sustenance feels comforting, though hunger still presses at your stomach with a patient, ache-filled persistence. You curl your fingers around the robe and draw it closer around your chest. As the hunger sharpens, a strange old recollection drifts into your mind. One trapper wrote that during the leanest winters, he sometimes believed hunger spoke to him, whispering odd suggestions or stirring strange dreams. He described hearing his own empty stomach as if it were a separate presence curling around him in the dark. Later readers, trying to interpret his curious phrasing, remain divided. Some assume he was describing the delirium that comes with prolonged hunger and extreme cold. Others think he simply had a poetic streak that surfaced whenever he was exhausted. But the passage carries an eerie intimacy, and tonight you almost understand what he meant. You press your hand to your stomach again. The emptiness feels like a small echo inside you, a hollow chamber collecting every breath. You rise slowly from your bedding to stretch your legs. The cold bites immediately, sliding through the gaps in your robe, tugging at your feet and fingers. You walk a few slow circles around the fire, your boots crunching in the snow. Each step reminds you how much energy the night has taken from your body. Survival in weather like this demands constant fuel. Without enough, the cold becomes a hunter all its own. You picture the old trappers trudging through waist-deep snow searching for something edible. A handful of pine nuts, a rabbit trail leading to a snare, maybe even the remains of a frozen berry bush. Some winters were generous. Others stripped the land bare. One veteran trapper once wrote that he sometimes ate snow out of habit, just to quiet the feeling of dryness in his throat, even though he knew it cooled his body dangerously. Modern readers still discuss whether this detail was literal or exaggerated, because melting snow in the body lowers core temperature quickly. Yet many frontiersmen admitted to doing the same thing in moments of weakness. You kneel near the fire again, holding your hands out toward the flames. The warmth rises gradually, like a slow tide. You close your eyes, hearing your stomach tighten once more with a quiet, stubborn growl. Hunger changes the way the night feels. It turns the cold from an inconvenience into a predator, creeping through the edges of your layers, testing your resilience. You take a deep breath and imagine the trappers who survived months with little more than dried meat and determination. Their journals describe nights when the cold felt like teeth, and mornings when their bodies felt too empty to move. But they moved anyway, driven by instinct and the need to keep warm by keeping busy. You open your eyes and look at the riverbank in the distance. In warmer seasons, fish might have offered a quick meal, but now the water is locked under layers of ice, whispering faintly beneath the surface. The forest offers little, unless you have traps set or luck on your side. Your hunger sharpens again. You rub your hands across your robe to generate heat. The fire crackles, offering comfort but no calories. Every breath tastes thin and sharp. And then, as your thoughts hover between discomfort and reflection, another memory rises. A peculiar observation written by a retired trapper who believed hunger made the night more honest. He claimed that when a man's stomach was empty, he saw the world more clearly, heard the forest more vividly, and sensed dangers more quickly. Some modern interpreters of frontier writings debate the meaning of such statements, wondering whether hunger truly sharpened the senses, or whether these men simply grew accustomed to surviving with less than they needed. The interpretations vary, just as the winters did. You settle back into your bedding, pulling the robe around you tightly. The heated stones beneath you have cooled further, but they still provide enough warmth to keep your body from sinking into the cold earth. Your stomach growls again, but softer this time, quieter, almost resigned. Hunger becomes a companion tonight, not a threat. It reminds you of the effort survival demanded, of the constant negotiation between comfort and cold. The mountain men faced nights exactly like this one, their bodies thin from long days, their spirits tested by the low whisper of an empty belly. You breathe slowly, letting the cold air fill your lungs. The fire glows softly beside you. The lean-to holds firm against the wind. The forest remains still, waiting for dawn. And you, hollow-stomached but steady, wait alongside it, learning in your bones what the mountain men once endured. You settle back into your bedding, pulling the robe around you tightly. The heated stones beneath you have cooled further, but they still provide enough warmth to keep your body from sinking into the cold earth. Your stomach growls again, but softer this time, quieter, almost resigned. As the world grows a shade lighter with the earliest hint of dawn, another truth about mountain life surfaces in your thoughts, one that mattered almost as much as food, shelter, or heat: the reliance on a trusted partner. You sit up slowly, brushing snow from your shoulders. The fire glows low, casting a reddish halo across the clearing. You picture what it would feel like to have another person stirring beside you now, another breath rising in the cold, another pair of hands tending the fire, another presence to steady the loneliness that the deep nights of the Rockies often carried. A widely referenced detail in accounts from fur brigades explains that most trappers did not travel alone for long stretches. They partnered up, sometimes in rotating pairs, sometimes with a single pard they trusted through entire seasons. These partnerships were practical arrangements but also lifelines. One man could fetch water while the other patched a boot, one could tend the fire while the other checked the traps. And in nights this cold, two minds working together meant fewer mistakes. You stand and walk a short circle around the clearing, your boots leaving crisp prints in the powder. As you step, you imagine a partner moving beside you, matching your pace, sharing quiet observations about the way the snow gathered at the base of the trees or the tracks winding toward the river. Mountain men spent months in the wilderness, and even silence shared with another could feel like warmth. A curious recollection from a frontier memoir crosses your mind. One trapper claimed that the best partnerships were formed not through common interests, but through matched stubbornness. According to him, two men who were equally persistent survived better than mismatched pairs. Later readers who studied this memoir found the idea amusing, but also strangely insightful. Whether stubbornness truly mattered, or whether the writer simply saw his own qualities reflected in success remains an open question, with interpretations varying widely. You stop near the riverbank, listening to the faint, muffled movement of water beneath the ice. You imagine a pair of trappers crouched beside it, breaking through the frozen shell to fill a kettle. One watching for danger, the other chipping steadily with a hatchet. The shared rhythm of survival, the simple efficiency of trust. You turn back toward your fire and lean down to grab a small branch. The flames brighten as you feed it in. You settle once more onto the pine boughs, drawing the robe back around your chest. The warmth rises slowly, drawn upward by your body heat. For a moment, you close your eyes and picture two men reclining on similar bedding, their boots pointing toward the fire, the soft crackle of flames stitching them into the same little world. Partnerships among mountain men weren't always sentimental. They were often blunt, practical, and shaped by necessity. Some men barely spoke to each other by choice, communicating only through gestures or short commands. Others shared jokes, stories, complaints, and long trails of wandering thoughts. Winter brought out unusual bonds, ones that flickered like firelight between companionship and survival. You breathe slowly, letting the warmth fill your chest. Another peculiar memory surfaces, something from a lesser-known trapping narrative. The writer insisted that a man slept better if he trusted the person beside him. He wrote that he could always sense unease in a restless partner, even before waking fully. It was as if tension traveled through the shared bedding like a subtle vibration. Whether he intended this literally or symbolically remains unclear, and those who study old journals still debate how much intuition played into survival partnerships. You shift again on the pine boughs, imagining the comfort of knowing someone else was responsible for watching the fire while you slept. The thought alone brings a small, surprising ease to your chest. So much of frontier life depended on dividing the burden. In pairs, tasks became manageable instead of overwhelming. One man broke trail, while the other scanned the horizon. One carried the traps while the other shouldered the extra food. Even silence felt shared, not heavy. The forest sighs around you, a long, low breath brushing past the lean-to. Snow lifts from a distant branch and falls with a muted puff. You look toward the tree line, sensing how the vastness might feel different with a reliable partner standing beside you, not less wild, but less empty. You pull your robe tighter, feeling the fire's warmth blend softly with the lingering heat of the stones. In the dim pre-dawn, you sense the deep value the mountain men placed on companionship, not friendship as the modern world thinks of it, but a bond forged through frost, distance, exhaustion, risk, and repeated endurance. You tilt your head back and study the faint glow building behind the trees. Daylight is still far off, but you can feel it approaching, thin and patient. You breathe once more, slow and steady. Partnerships made nights like these survivable. They created shared strength when the cold felt endless. They turned the wilderness from a lonely test into a joint effort. And even now, imagining another presence nearby brings a warmth that neither fire nor robe can fully provide on their own. You settle deeper into your bedding, letting that imagined warmth carry you into the final stretch of night. You curl a little deeper into the buffalo robe, feeling the faint rumble of your stomach settle as the sky lightens just a shade more behind the trees. The cold is still sharp, still biting, but the world no longer feels entirely hostile. A glimmer of morning hovers somewhere beyond the horizon, waiting to slip between the pines. You breathe in the quiet and let it fill your chest. Then you rise slowly, stretching stiff muscles, brushing away loose snow that clings to your sleeves. Walking a few steps away from the fire, you feel your boots sinking into the powder with a gentle, steady crunch. The clearing is calm, almost too calm. You look around and imagine the mountain men in this same moment centuries ago, drifting between exhaustion and determination. They didn't always sleep through the whole night. Sometimes they couldn't afford to. A regularly cited observation from frontier accounts explains that mountain men often took tiny rests during long treks rather than full nights of sleep. These short pauses, barely more than brief collapses, allowed them to catch just enough warmth and breath to continue moving. Traversing the Rockies meant long distances between safe camps. If storms closed in or trails disappeared under new snow, men settled wherever they could, even if it meant lying down for only 10 minutes. You picture such a moment clearly now. A weary trapper dropping to one knee beside a frozen trail, pulling his coat tighter and curling himself into a small knot against the wind. No fire, no hides. Just the desperate need to shut his eyes and let his breathing even out for a few stolen minutes. You feel the memory settle into your bones as you stand in the cold. As you walk to the edge of the forest, brushing aside a low branch, you recall an unusual practice mentioned in a forgotten winter journal. The writer insisted that these roadside rests worked best if he placed his hands beneath his armpits and pressed his elbows tight to his ribs, a posture he believed helped him drift into a half-sleep faster. Whether this odd technique was based on instinct or pure imagination remains unclear. Those who've studied the journal still offer differing interpretations, each amused by the specificity of the habit. You smile faintly as you imagine him trying to sleep upright, swaying slightly like a tired bird on a branch. As you continue across the clearing, a soft wind brushes past your cheek. The cold feels thinner now, diluted by the promise of sunrise. You step toward a fallen log half buried under fresh snow. Its surface forms a narrow bench. You sit carefully, brushing away loose flakes, and take a slow breath. You can almost feel the exhaustion that winter travelers carried. After trudging through miles of deep drifts, a simple pause against a log could feel like a momentary refuge. Some men described drifting into a strange, hovering state between waking and sleeping, where sounds grew distant but their bodies remained tense against the cold. These moments weren't restful, exactly, but they granted enough clarity to push forward. The forest around you murmurs lightly, branches shifting under the last touches of night wind. You adjust your position on the log and close your eyes briefly, mimicking one of those mid-journey rests. Your eyelids grow heavy in an instant. Fatigue feels like a quiet tide rising through your limbs, nudging you towards softness. You understand how easily a man could slip into sleep on the trail. Too easily, perhaps. You open your eyes again with a sharp inhale, the cold snapping you back to focus. Mountain men had to walk a careful line, rest too long, and the cold stole warmth from their bodies faster than they regained it. Sleep too deeply, and they risked slipping into dangerous stillness. These half-dreaming breaks were calculated short, disciplined, and always followed by motion. A distant rustle in the forest brings your attention back to the present, perhaps a deer wandering through its morning routine. perhaps the shifting of a branch from last night's storm. You listen carefully, then turn your gaze upward. The sky has lightened another shade. The stars fade slightly, their edges softening. Another memory surfaces, pulled from the writings of a solitary winter explorer. He claimed that during difficult stretches, he could fall asleep standing upright, one hand resting on his rifle. He described waking with a sudden jolt, unsure whether seconds or minutes had passed. Scholars reading his accounts have long debated whether such claims were literal or metaphorical. Some consider it a symptom of extreme fatigue. Others see it as a figure of speech to illustrate exhaustion. Either way, the image lingers. You stand from the fallen log and walk back toward your lean-to. The fire greets you with a faint hiss as a new gust of wind crosses the clearing. You kneel beside it and turn a few of the leftover embers, coaxing the glow into a brighter flicker. You place a small piece of wood atop them, watching the gentle flames slowly gather strength. Moving again feels good. The cold in your bones shifts, cracks, and makes room for warmth. You settle back onto your pine boughs, pulling the robe over your legs. The world is still dim, but the edges of dawn creep closer. You breathe out slowly, letting your body relax into the fire's gentle rhythm. You imagine a mountain man doing the same, sighing through fatigue, conserving strength, grateful for every tiny warmth that pushed him through the day. You sit quietly, reflecting on the nature of these mid-journey rests. They were never luxurious, never long, never secure, but they were essential. They taught the trappers to listen to their own limits, to use every ounce of energy wisely, and to accept that survival often hinged on small decisions made in moments of weakness. You draw the robe closer, feeling the fire's soft heat move across your face. The night is almost gone, and the day waits patiently beyond the trees. And you, having rested just enough to feel the strength return to your limbs, prepare yourself to face whatever the mountains ask of you next. You shift your weight on the pine boughs, feeling the faint stiffness in your muscles as the sky brightens by a shade you can almost feel rather than see. The fire beside you sighs gently, reduced to a quiet bed of embers that pulse like a slow heartbeat. The cold still clings to the edges of everything, but dawn is close enough now that you can sense the world preparing to wake. You stand slowly, drawing the buffalo robe around your shoulders. As you move toward the tree line, you think of something else that shaped the mountain men's nights and sleep more than many realize: the influence of the indigenous peoples whose lands they crossed. The trappers learned more from native communities than most accounts ever fully acknowledge, especially when it came to surviving winter. Sleeping warm in these mountains required knowledge that had existed long before the fur trade, refined across generations. You step between two spruces and notice how the wind softens under their branches. The ground here is less disturbed, and the snow lies smooth, sculpted by the night. You pull the robe tighter, imagining the teachings that flowed between cultures in the early frontier days. Indigenous guidance often arrived, not as formal lessons but as quiet observations passed along in conversation, gesture, or simple example. A frequently mentioned point in frontier history is that mountain men borrowed many sleeping techniques from indigenous groups, especially regarding positioning. They learned to orient their bedding so their backs faced prevailing winds, their heads tilted slightly uphill to prevent cold air from sliding into their lungs as they slept. You mimic this posture now, turning your body to imagine where you'd lie if this were the only shelter you had. Even this subtle shift feels warmer. As you pace a few steps, a curious detail resurfaces from an account you once read. A trapper described his surprise upon seeing a native elder warming stones not by the fire, but by burying them in the snow near the flames first. The man claimed this softened the heat, making the stones safer to handle and longer lasting. Later readers have offered differing interpretations of this description, unsure whether the method was widely used or simply misremembered by the writer. But the image lingers in your mind, adding another layer to the quiet knowledge that shaped survival here. You walk deeper into the trees, where the wind is almost non-existent. You crouch beside a cluster of small saplings, examining how their branches catch drifting snow in smooth layers. You imagine learning from someone who had lived on this land since birth, someone who knew how to read the snow the way others read written words. Indigenous communities understood the behavior of winter storms intimately. They knew how to choose natural depressions for shelter, how to use tree wells as sleeping spaces, and how to create warmth from what looked like nothing. You touch the trunk of a broad spruce, feeling the cool roughness beneath your glove. A faint scent of sap rises, grounding you in the moment. You recall another intriguing mention found in winter ethnographies, the practice of lining ground shelters with bark or grass mats to create a dry barrier before laying down furs. The mountain men adopted this habit quickly, weaving grasses or drying bark strips by the fire before pressing them under their bedding. Some scholars examining these practices have puzzled over exactly how consistently this was done, but the idea itself shows how cross-cultural learning shaped frontier survival. You step back toward the clearing, your boots sinking softly into the snow. The sky above the treetops takes on a pale gradient now, a first promise of daylight. You breathe in the stillness and think about how the trappers observed indigenous families in winter encampments, how they stored embers in carved wooden containers lined with ash, how they built windbreaks from snow blocks or evergreen boughs, how they arranged sleeping furs in layers that trapped warmth through shared proximity. You reach the edge of your clearing again and pause beside your lean-to. The hide draped over the poles glows faintly with emberlight. You duck under it and sit on your pine boughs, letting the warmth gather around your legs. The heated stones beneath you have faded to a gentle warmth, but the robe still holds most of the heat from the night. Another memory surfaces, something unusual you once read in a missionary's winter account. He claimed that one native family he stayed with pressed their feet together while sleeping in a row, creating a chain of warmth that traveled down the line. Whether he described an actual tradition or misinterpreted what he saw is still uncertain. The detail appears only once in his writings, leaving researchers to wonder about its origins. Still, the idea strikes you as both practical and oddly intimate, a reflection of how community shaped warmth in the coldest nights. You sit quietly beneath the lean-to, listening to the soft hum of the forest waking. A faint flutter of wings passes overhead as a bird shifts on its perch. The cold air around you feels less hostile now, softened by the knowledge that centuries of winter wisdom preceded your night here. You glance once more toward the tree line, imagining the countless nights when mountain men rested near indigenous camps, watching how expertly fires were arranged, how shelters were shaped, how raw cold was met, not with panic, but with calm, practiced skill. Much of what kept them alive came from this quiet exchange. You pull the robe tighter and settle your weight back onto the boughs. The fire flickers its approval, crackling softly in the new light. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth gather in your chest, as the first true hint of dawn stretches cautiously across the mountains. In this moment, wrapped in borrowed techniques and inherited resilience, you feel connected to the layered history that kept weary travelers alive through countless winters. And the day begins to rise. You ease back under the lean-to as the sky brightens, feeling the cold beginning its slow retreat from the edges of your robe. The fire glows with renewed determination after your careful tending, and the trees around the clearing now hold a soft shimmer of pale morning light. You take a deep breath, letting the crisp air settle gently into your chest. The world feels larger now that the darkness has loosened its grip, and with the coming day, your thoughts drift toward a different kind of refuge the mountain men relied on when winter pressed too hard. The makeshift cabins they built to survive full seasons in the frozen ranges. You step out from beneath the lean-to and stretch your arms overhead. Your joints crack softly, stiffened by hours curled under hides. You feel the cold nip at your cheeks, but the threat is fading. A thin band of sunrise touches the treetops, coloring them with the faintest gold. You turn toward the forest and begin walking slowly, imagining the kinds of shelters the trappers constructed when they found a suitable place to winter in. A commonly referenced detail from early fur trade records notes that mountain men often built small log cabins in valleys where game was plentiful and water flowed even in winter. These cabins were simple: 4 walls of hand-cut logs, a rough roof covered in bark or hides, and a small fire pit or chimney of stacked stones. They weren't meant to be permanent, only strong enough to withstand the storms and cold months. As you walk, you imagine such a structure tucked between 2 pines. You visualize snow piled along its sides for extra insulation, the door made from a single slab of wood or even stretched hide. Inside, furs draped across the floor, a fire glowing low in a small hearth, the scent of smoke, pine pitch, and cooked meat hanging in the air like a comfort you've almost forgotten. You brush your gloves across the bark of a tall spruce, feeling the rough ridges scrape lightly against your palm. Another memory emerges, one drawn from an old trapping journal. The writer described how he and 2 companions spent an entire winter snowbound in a crude cabin they had built in late autumn. He claimed the logs creaked through the cold nights, as if the cabin itself were shivering along with them. Historians reviewing this account remain unsure whether the creaking was exaggerated or simply the natural shift of frozen wood. Still, the image stays with you: 3 men huddled by a fire, listening to their tiny refuge groan in the wind. You continue walking until you reach a small rise overlooking a cluster of firs. Here, the snow lies smoother, untouched except for the occasional animal track. This would be a good place to build, you think. Level ground, natural windbreaks, trees close enough for timber. You imagine yourself cutting logs with a dull axe, stacking them carefully, sealing gaps with mud or moss. The effort would be exhausting, but the reward: 4 walls guarding you against the winter would feel almost like luxury. A cold breeze brushes your face, carrying a hint of wood smoke from your fire. You turn back toward camp, walking slowly, letting your thoughts drift deeper into the world of winter cabins. Some of the structures built by mountain men held surprising quirks. One trapper wrote that he lined the inside walls of his cabin with spare animal skins because he believed it kept the spirits of the cold from slipping through. Whether he meant this literally or metaphorically is unclear, and those who study early frontier folklore still discuss what such phrasing reveals about the psychology of winter isolation. You smile at the oddity of the idea as you step beneath the branches again. Isolation shapes people in different ways. Long winter months, days of silence, nights of restless cold. It's no surprise the men grew imaginative in their rituals. As you near the clearing, your lean-to comes into view again, its hide glistening where frost has settled on its surface. The fire glows warmly, welcoming you back. You settle beside it, pulling your robe tight as you lower yourself onto the pine boughs. The stones beneath have cooled almost completely now, but you can still feel the faint heat stored in the earth where they rested. You close your eyes briefly and imagine yourself inside a crude cabin instead of this exposed clearing. The fire would burn inside a stone-lined hearth. The roof would drip slowly as snow melted from earlier storms. The logs would creak, stretching under the weight of ice and wind. The warmth wouldn't be perfect, but it would gather in pockets around the room, settling like invisible blankets over the sleeping men. Another curious detail from winter writings drifts through your thoughts. One cabin dweller claimed he slept better in a narrow bunk built along the wall because he believed the earth pressed warmth upward through the logs. Whether this idea reflected a real sensation or his imagination remains uncertain. Those who analyze such recollections continue offering differing interpretations. But his conviction shows how closely the trappers observed even tiny changes in warmth within their shelters. You open your eyes again and watch the sun's first true light push through the trees. The world brightens, revealing the fresh contours left by the night's snowfall. Your lean-to looks small, almost fragile, compared to the imaginary cabin you've been wandering through in your mind. And yet you feel a surprising fondness for this simple shelter. It held firm through the storm. It kept you dry. It created a tiny pocket of peace in an otherwise relentless landscape. As morning takes hold, you wrap the robe tighter around your shoulders and sit closer to the fire. The forest stretches out beyond you, waking slowly, stretching its limbs after the long night. Somewhere out there, mountain men once spent whole winters hidden away inside rough cabins, feeling the cold seep in through cracks, hearing wolves howl beyond the walls, sharing quiet conversations as snow drifted past the windows. You feel connected to them now, through the fire, through the cold, through this small shelter built with your own hands. And as the light continues to grow, you settle deeper into the pine boughs, grateful for the warmth you've found and the knowledge carried through generations of winter survivors. You sit quietly beneath your lean-to, feeling the gentle return of sensation to your fingers as the morning light grows a little stronger. The forest around you begins to stretch into wakefulness, branches stirring, the faint tapping of a woodpecker echoing in the distance. Your fire gives off a warm pulse, and the world feels a shade less harsh than it did hours ago. As the cold loosens its grip, your thoughts drift towards something softer, something that once helped mountain men endure the long, frozen nights as much as any hide or fire did, their dreams. You sink deeper into the pine boughs, the buffalo robe settling across your shoulders with comforting weight. The warmth from the coals glows in comforting waves across your legs. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the trappers resting beside similar fires, slipping into sleep with thoughts that wandered far beyond the wilderness. Even the hardest men on the frontier carried memories of home, the echo of familiar voices, and the pull of warmth that did not come from a fire. A frequently noted detail in journals from the fur trade era explains that many mountain men dreamt vividly during winter. The cold, the exhaustion, and the isolation combined to stir the mind into restless imagery. Some wrote that dreams of home came more often during the darkest months. Others claimed they dreamt of campfires burning brighter than any real flame, or of fields filled with warm summer grasses. These dreams acted as anchors, holding threads of comfort in nights that otherwise felt endless. You shift slightly, letting the robe gather around your chest. The pine scent rises again as you move. You imagine yourself drifting into sleep in the same way an old trapper once described. He wrote that when he nodded off beside the fire, he sometimes saw his childhood home as if he had never left it. He described his mother's voice, the sound of a kettle, the warmth of a hearth, details so clear he insisted they felt more real than waking life. Scholars who have reviewed his journals often discuss whether such vivid recollections were shaped by the emotional strain of isolation or by the physiological effects of sleeping in extreme cold. No firm conclusion exists, but the vividness of the man's words continues to stir curiosity. You open your eyes again and watch the embers shift softly. The firelight dances in slow ripples across the snow, weaving patterns that feel almost hypnotic. You can understand how easy it would be to slip into dreamlike thoughts on a night like this. Even now, after surviving the storm and the coldest hour, your mind feels loose, drifting gently between memory and imagination. You lean forward slightly, stretching your hands toward the coals. Your skin tingles with returning warmth. You think of the way trappers described drifting off beside a fire, how they listened to the low crackle of burning wood, the distant howl of wind through trees, the shifting groan of frozen earth. These sounds blended with their dreams, shaping strange and beautiful mixtures of reality and memory. Another curious recollection surfaces, something from a winter report written by a man who traveled with a small trapping company. He claimed one of his companions often muttered names in his sleep, speaking to people who were not there. The writer said he once heard his companion whisper a woman's name over and over, almost like a lullaby. Later readers remain unsure whether the account reflected exhaustion, loneliness, or simply the natural drift of the dreaming mind. The detail lingers, though, adding a fragile humanity to men often remembered only for grit and bravado. You settle back onto the pine boughs, letting your head rest near the hide wall of your lean-to. The shelter creaks softly as a faint breeze brushes its surface. The world feels calm now, almost gentle in its quiet. You imagine slipping into dreams of your own, warmed by the fire, wrapped in fur, listening to the low rustle of pine branches as the forest murmurs around you. Dreams were more than comfort. They were escape. They shaped the mental resilience of the mountain men who spent months surrounded by snow, danger, and silence. Some wrote that their dreams soothed them. Others claimed the dreams confused them, blurring the line between longing for home and accepting the wilderness as their new world. One journal entry you once read described a trapper waking in panic, convinced for a moment that he was back in his childhood bed, only to find the fire dying beside him and the cold creeping into his bones. Modern interpreters of such writings continue to discuss whether this confusion reflects the emotional cost of frontier isolation or a deeper psychological adaptation to constant exposure. You breathe slowly, feeling the weight of these thoughts settle in your chest. The forest whispers gently as a small bird flits from branch to branch, shaking snow loose in tiny cascades. You pull the robe around you a little tighter and let your attention return to the fire. You imagine the trappers lying around a winter cabin, each man wrapped in his own furs, the dim glow of a shared hearth flickering across their faces. Perhaps one would shift in his sleep, another might murmur. Someone might dream of warm bread, or open fields, or a familiar path long buried beneath childhood memory. Even in these rugged lives, sleep did not belong solely to the wilderness. Dreams carried them elsewhere. As you sit beneath your shelter, the warmth growing steadier against your chest, you feel something similar wash over you. The harsh night has passed, the coldest air has quieted. The world around you feels softened by fresh snow and tentative dawn light. You let your eyes close briefly, inviting the drifting sensation that carried those old travelers across the thin border between waking and sleep. Images rise unbidden. The fire glows brighter. The robe feels heavier. A warm room flickers at the edge of your imagination. It is not real, and yet it feels familiar, comforting. You open your eyes again, smiling faintly. The dreamlike edge still lingers, blending the smell of smoke with some forgotten memory that refuses to fully surface. You sit up, breathing deeply, letting the forest fill your senses. Night is over, but the lingering thoughts of warmth, home, and memory remain. These were the quiet companions of the mountain men, just as vital as food or fire. You open your eyes again, smiling faintly. The dreamlike edge still lingers, blending the smell of smoke with some forgotten memory that refuses to fully surface. Dreams kept their spirits alive. Dreams softened their solitude, and in many cases, dreams were the only warmth they carried with them through the coldest nights. You rise slowly from the pine boughs, the buffalo robe sliding from your shoulders in a heavy wave of warmth that clings for a moment before surrendering to the morning air. The sky has lightened into soft blue-grey, the kind that promises a clearer day but still holds the sharp edge of winter. You stretch your arms above your head, feeling joints crack gently, and step out from beneath the lean-to. Snow crunches under your boots with a crispness only dawn can create. Your fire has dwindled to a glowing cluster of coals, bright enough to warm your hands but no longer strong enough to push back the cold on its own. You kneel beside it, feeding it a few small twigs until the glow brightens and a thin flame begins to rise. As the embers revive, their warmth spreads slowly, greeting your fingers like an old friend. Morning in the Rockies was not a leisurely time for the mountain men. A well-known observation from frontier journals is that at first light, trappers moved quickly. They broke camp with practiced hands, repacked their meager possessions, checked their traps, and prepared themselves for long miles of travel. Morning was the moment to reclaim the trail, not linger in comfort. You feel a small echo of that urgency now as you look around your camp. You dust snow from your robe, adjust your boots, and take stock of your surroundings. The lean-to stands as a lopsided triangle under the trees, dusted with a fresh layer of frost. The pine boughs beneath your bedding still carry your imprint. The stones you heated last night lie scattered where the snow has begun to reclaim them. Everything around you carries the quiet marks of a night survived. You begin gathering your scattered items, moving slowly but purposefully. The forest is quiet except for the gentle tapping of a woodpecker in the distance, and the occasional groan of a branch releasing its weight of snow. You brush the hide of the lean-to with your glove, shaking loose a cloud of white powder. You feel a small surge of appreciation for the simple shelter that kept the storm's anger at bay. As you work, a curious detail from an old traveler's letter surfaces in your thoughts. He described how the quiet of early morning made him believe the mountains themselves listened to his every movement. According to his account, he tried to pack silently to avoid waking the ridges. Whether he meant this literally or simply leaned into the poetry of solitude is uncertain. People who've read and analyzed his writings remain divided. Some interpret his words as signs of winter loneliness pressing on his mind. Others think he was describing a kind of respectful calm the wilderness inspired. You feel a trace of that sensation now as you move carefully, your footsteps muted beneath fresh snow. You return to the fire and add a slightly larger stick. The flame strengthens, sending a warm ripple through the clearing. You warm your hands briefly, savoring the heat. Then you begin breaking down the lean-to, lifting the hide free from its poles. Snow tumbles down as you shake the hide clean. The smell of cold fur mixes with the scent of pine. You fold the hide neatly, the movement familiar, automatic. The poles fall into the snow with soft thuds as you dismantle the frame. You stack them carefully beside the nearest tree. Even though you do not need them for the rest of your journey, you find yourself placing them tidily. Mountain men often did the same. A repeated note in several journals mentions that trappers occasionally left campsites tidy, partly out of habit, partly out of superstition that a well-kept camp invited better luck later. Whether this idea had practical roots or deeper symbolic meaning is still debated among those who study frontier folklore. You step back and examine the clearing. The camp looks bare now, the shelter dismantled, the bedding flattened, the fire reduced to a faint shimmer. The world seems larger without the small boundaries you built through the night. The cold air touches your face with renewed clarity. You pull the robe around your shoulders and feel the fur warm quickly under your breath. You lift one of the cooled stones from your bedding area and roll it between your gloved palms. Its surface is smooth and faintly warm, holding the memory of last night's fire. For a moment, you think of the mountain men who saved certain stones, believing lucky rocks kept heat better. One winter account describes a trapper who carried a favorite stone for months, convinced it protected him. Whether this was a private superstition or a practical comfort remains unclear. Later readers still offer their own interpretations, some amused, others intrigued. You set the stone back onto the snow and stand upright. The clearing feels calm now, touched by early sunlight. Thin beams filter through the trees, sparking off frost crystals like tiny rivers of light. You breathe deeply, letting the cold-laced air settle into your lungs. Your breath escapes in soft, steady clouds. You take one more slow circle around the clearing, making sure nothing remains behind. Your tracks from the night curve gently through the snow. You feel the weight of anticipation that mountain men described each morning. To rise stiff, step into frozen boots, tighten the straps on a pack, and follow the trail into uncertainty. The fire gives a final crackle behind you, a soft farewell. You crouch and scatter the coals gently with the tip of a branch. Smoke rises in delicate spirals, thin and pale. The flames fade into embers, then into glowing ash. Soon the fire blends quietly into the snow around it, as if it never existed. You stand again, adjusting the buffalo robe across your shoulders. The cold air brushes your cheeks, but it feels less sharp now that you've begun moving. You take one final look at the place where you slept, the humble circle of warmth you carved out of the storm. The memory of the night settles into you, gentle yet resilient, like a story waiting to be told again. You turn your body toward the trail's direction, feeling the snow shift beneath your boots. The forest seems to breathe with you, steady and calm. Morning stretches across the mountains, crisp and bright. And you, ready to step forward, carry the quiet of the night with you, as you take the first step toward the day. You take your first steps away from the remnants of your camp, the snow crunching softly beneath your boots as the morning light settles fully over the clearing. The air feels sharper now, but not as hostile as before. You tug the buffalo robe tighter around your shoulders and pause for a moment, glancing back at the place where the fire once glowed and the lean-to rested under the pine branches. It looks peaceful now, untouched, as though the night's struggle never happened. But you feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the lingering stiffness of your fingers. The mountains leave their mark on anyone who spends a night in their grasp. You move toward the tree line, following a narrow path where the snow lies shallower. Your steps echo lightly in the quiet forest. Ahead of you, the world stretches in soft gradients of pale blue and white. Behind you, the clearing fades into memory. As you walk, you think about how mountain men faced mornings like this countless times. Each dawn meant decisions. Each dawn meant continuing forward, even when another night lingered only hours away. A frequently noted reality in the old trapping journals is that choosing where to rest each night mattered as much as the journey itself. Surviving one freezing bivouac did not guarantee safety in the next. Every evening demanded its own calculations, its own instincts, its own small victories. You feel a new appreciation for that truth now as you continue down the trail, kicking aside small clumps of snow and brushing frost from your robe. You follow the path between two towering spruces. The snow here is soft and deep, muffling the sound of your footsteps. The forest emits faint sounds, the whisper of wind through distant branches, the occasional thump of snow slipping from a limb, the soft creak of trunks adjusting to the morning chill. You breathe slowly, taking in the rich scent of pine needles and cold earth. The clarity of the air is almost startling, crisp enough to clear your thoughts instantly. You stop near a fallen log half buried in snow. The morning sun gleams faintly on its surface, turning frost into tiny sparks. You touch the cold bark and imagine how a mountain man, on a morning like this, might pause just long enough to gauge the day ahead. Should he follow the river? Should he turn toward the ridge? Should he rebuild his camp and stay a while longer? In these mountains, choices bore weight, and every small decision could tilt survival one way or the other. You stand again and keep walking till you reach a small rise overlooking a valley blanketed in fresh snow. The landscape stretches out in long, rolling curves, framed by distant peaks that glow faintly under the rising sun. You feel the cold breeze slide across your face, carrying with it the scent of distant water and the promise of changing weather. Your boots sink slightly as you descend from the rise. With each step, you imagine the trappers who crossed these same ridges long before you, men who judged the weather by the pale shimmer of frost on branches, by the direction birds took at dawn, by the taste of the air itself. You recall a curious detail from one winter account, a trapper who believed that the first sound he heard each morning foretold his day. If he heard a bird, he expected good luck. You stand again and keep walking till you reach a small rise overlooking a valley blanketed in fresh snow. The landscape stretches out in long, rolling curves, framed by distant peaks that glow faintly under the rising sun. You feel the cold breeze slide across your face, carrying with it the scent of distant water and the promise of changing weather. As you reach the valley floor, you pause once more and look around. The snow is untouched here, smooth except for the trail you leave behind. The frost glitters like 1,000 tiny mirrors catching the morning sun. You take a slow breath and allow the quiet to settle around you. The cold is still present, still testing you, but in daylight it feels less like an enemy and more like a companion, stern, demanding, but honest. You turn back toward the direction of your camp, though the clearing is hidden now behind trees and gentle slopes. You imagine the mountain men doing the same, glancing back at the places where they carved out brief moments of warmth and wondering how many more nights lay ahead. Each dawn asked them to keep moving. Each dawn whispered its own challenge. You adjust the buffalo robe one last time and begin walking again. The snow shifts beneath your boots. The wind hums a gentle tune through the branches. and the mountains rise around you like ancient guardians. You feel yourself becoming part of the long line of travelers who learned, step by step, night by night, to endure winter in these wild ranges. And as you walk, the memory of the last frozen bivouac lingers warmly at your back, a final quiet lesson from a night spent in the cold's relentless embrace. You slow your pace now, letting each breath flow out softly into the calm morning air. The sun climbs just a little higher, smoothing the edges of the snow with a faint golden wash. You loosen your shoulders beneath the buffalo robe and allow the warmth of movement to gather gently through your limbs. Everything feels quieter here, softened by the distance you've placed between yourself and the hardships of the night. Let yourself drift for a moment. Feel the cold receding, not abruptly, but in long, gentle waves that slide away from your hands and feet. The forest hums with a low, steady stillness, as if the mountains themselves are settling back into rest. The scent of pine lingers, delicate and calming, cushioning your thoughts like a soft blanket. Your footsteps become slower. Your breath grows heavier, deeper, rounder at the edges. Any lingering tension in your muscles begins to melt, loosening its hold as though the snow itself is carrying it away. The memories of the night of the fire, the stones, the lean-to, the sounds in the dark fade into soft impressions, gentle shapes that no longer press sharply on your senses. You feel your body growing quieter, your thoughts easing into that warm space between waking and dreaming. The world around you dims a little, not in brightness but in urgency. There is nothing you need to do now. No cold to fight, no fire to tend, no shelter to build. Only breath, only quiet, only rest. Let the mountains settle around you like a lullaby. Let the calm fill every place where the cold once lingered. Allow yourself to sink into stillness, warm and safe and steady.